Part 3. New Purgatory. Janet hadn't felt this thrill in months. There had been only so much she could share with her friends over their small radio chats, but so much had gone on. Tyrese had joined her on their ascent up the stairs. She saw that he was beaming. Being a historian of all things Crusader had turned him into something of a fanboy. Janet knew that a chance to meet two more surviving members was an opportunity he could not miss. "Easy, Tyrese. I think you might be drooling a little," Janet teased as she cracked a smile, the first she had in a long time. Tyrese turned his head and smiled back. For all his seriousness about reclaiming history, he had been a light-hearted man. He reminded her of Otto, in a more playful way and without the physical attributes of the convict. "This means more than the world to me, Janet. You, Alex, and Layla are heroes. No matter what campfire you go to out on the road or bar you find in the city, people talk about the Crusaders. Morale's gonna be raised up real high to have those two here again, helping us sort all this shit out." Janet agreed. Alex had left her a hell of a mess, and it was one she was struggling to handle. Between the refugees and Morrison's remnants becoming worse with each passing day, she needed more help. The two made it up the stairs where the ramp began its descent. Janet turned her attention back over to the bird. Alex, Layla, and a man she had never set eyes on before descended. She saw a makeshift bandage wrapped around Alex's hand, which made her worry. "Still pulling him out of fires, Blondie?" Janet asked as the trio moved over to her and Tyrese. "I'll never be able to keep him out of them," Layla replied with a smile as she embraced her old friend. When they broke away, Alex offered his unwounded hand, but Janet moved in for a hug. "Shit, Alex, I would have thought you'd known me better by now," Janet said. Alex gave her a sheepish smile. "It's been too long. I'd like you to meet Sam Gates. I traded my finger for him." Sam and Janet laughed lightly and shook hands. "Good to meet you. This is Tyrese Vale. He's been helping me keep control of the city, as well as a few other things. But we can talk about that later. Let's get you to your rooms." Gates was having trouble trying to understand his surroundings. He remembered buildings as a kid, of course, real ones, the kind that didn't fall apart if you took a wrong step on an upper floor, or weren't covered in gray dust from the destruction of the war. This was like stepping back into his childhood, a real intact building. He had traveled from the southern coast of California up into Canada, and he hadn't seen a place this whole. He forced himself to stifle every question that popped into his head, even though Alex and Layla had tried explaining it all to him before. "But what about the fallout, radiation? Even if the bombs didn't hit here," Gates started. "Morrison cleaned most of it up on the outskirts of the city, but that was before he started killing people. He always brought in hazmat groups before he sent soldiers out into the other states. That's how he built his army," Layla explained as the group moved through the stairwell. "What about those quakes Alex mentioned?" Gates pressed. "Those hit the parts of the city closest to the shielding, and where most of the refugees had been living up until 6 months ago," Janet answered. "Those areas probably look more like what you're used to, but one day we'll rebuild those too." When they reached their rooms and Alex saw the familiar oak table in the center, he finally felt at home. The map of New Purgatory and the bloody pierce where Mikhail had left his blade was still there. He looked about the flat. Above his room was Shea Vito's sword, hung like a trophy, or a sullen reminder. "Just like I remember," Alex said. "Where can Sam stay?" "He can take McGrath's old room," Janet replied, pointing toward the old explosive expert's door. Sam made his way for it while Tyrese went over to Otto's. "Giving away rooms now?" Alex whispered. "He's smart and he can fight. Helped me bring in a large group of survivors from Morrison's tower. Some of them were scientists that helped us reestablish power at the reactor." "So he's a talker," Alex said. "He's more than that. We need him and people like him, Alex. We're not going to be able to rebuild this place without people who can negotiate." Layla moved beside Janet. "You said you needed to talk to us?" "Yeah, let's get a booth down at the bar," Janet answered. "Hey, Ty, meet me in the bar in a few minutes." Janet led the two out of the room and down into Alonso's bar. Alex smiled as he felt the beat of music pulsing in his chest. It brought him back to the first time he came here with Elias. The two worried they would be killed for coming so far inside the city, but the reality had been far different. The hum of the bass drowned out the voices of the crowd at the bar and on the dance floor. The neon glow of ever-changing lights dilated their pupils, and the smell of all kinds of liquor, food, and sweat incensed the air. Janet, Alex, and Layla sat in a booth, darkened the lights around them, and dampened the sound in their area. Alex's mind could not help but replay how this exact same situation had occurred not so long ago. Layla was the first to reach up for the controls. She ordered a cup of hot tea for herself. Alex picked coffee, as did Janet. "Glad to see not all of the old man rubbed off on you," Janet said. Alex tried to keep his drinking to himself as often as he could, unless there was a call for celebration. "I get the feeling that it's going to be a long night, and I'm sure there's plenty we need to talk about." "That there is," Janet said as a waitress brought over their drinks. "You first or me?" "You," Alex said. Well, fuck. You must realize that the situation here is complicated. We've taken on more than Morrison civilians from the towers. It's caused some friction with the folks who lived in the outskirts." "So things aren't working as smoothly as they seem?" Layla asked. "For the most part, they are. The refugees from both sides are getting along fine. But after we got off the radio last time, another issue came up. There was a situation meant for my attention." "Who was trying to get your attention?" Layla pressed. "Morrison's remnant. They've been hitting our people in our caravans. One of their captains broke off with her platoon and wanted to defect." Alex crossed his arms. Funny how they want to help when they're on their losing side, but don't step aside when the score is in their favor. "I assume you answered with live rounds?" Janet looked down at her hands. "I told them they could join us, Alex. We need all the help we can get. That captain is on her way to meet you." Alex picked up his coffee and sipped it. "I seem to remember you berating me for bringing in Ezra. Now you're bringing in former Marines? Their loyalty isn't based off the value of a coin, Alex," Janet shot back. "No, it's worse," Alex said. "At least you could pay a mercenary. The Marines' actions were based on belief. Belief that they could get away with killing people in the streets. That they played up their value to you as a means of survival only proves what they are. Rats." "You don't even know them, Alex. They've helped us renovate living areas. They run patrols for us against the raiders, and even their old allies." "I think I can defend myself, Trishella," the voice came from across the bar. Alex spotted the tall woman, her blonde hair cut up to her neck underneath a beret, and her eyes that could have been cut from amber were cutting into him. Alex stood up, as did the rest of the booth. He met the captain face to face. No one followed her. She was still wearing the black and gray Morrison fatigues, though anywhere there was supposed to be a Morrison's Marines patch was torn and replaced by stitches. While Alex looked her up and down, Keely Vixer turned her head towards Janet. "Why is it I feel like he's going to shoot me in the back when I turn around?" "I'm not one of your soldiers. If I shoot you, you'll see it," Alex answered. Vixer moved her face closer to Alex's. "You have something you want to say about my Marines?" Alex pushed his forehead against the captain's. "Yeah, with my fists, my knife, or the 20 rounds I have in my rifle, you fascist bitch." "Enough, Alex," Layla said from behind him. "Yeah, listen to your pet whore," Vixer said. Before Alex could react, Layla had pushed him aside and threw a fist at Vixer's face that dropped the captain to the floor. Vixer didn't stay down long and produced a pistol from her hip, aiming it at Layla. The sound of another pistol having its hammer pulled back sounded off behind the captain. It was Tyrese, sighting down on her. The entire club echoed the sound of weaponry being cocked and loaded, with guns aimed in every direction. "Enough!" Janet yelled out. "Everyone put your fucking weapons down. I didn't fight my way through a goddamn tower to be killed in a fucking bar." Many of the patrons' weapons dropped, and after a few moments Vixer put hers back at her hip. Layla walked over to Vixer and extended a hand to lift her. "Nice hook," Vixer said as she regained her footing. "Call me that again, and I'll throw you off the fucking building," Layla whispered before taking a few steps back. "Nice friends you have here, Janet. I should have known their minds wouldn't have been as open as yours." Vixer wiped her lip. "Enough, Vixer. I should have explained this better," Janet replied. "Alex, I didn't bring her in to piss you off. She has resources and soldiers we need. The Remnant knows our patrols too well. She evens the score, and if I remember right, you left me in charge of rebuilding and I haven't had any help. I'm doing what I need to do." Alex reached for his mug on the table and took a long sip. "It's that bad?" he asked, not taking his eyes off Vixer. "It wouldn't have been if you had stayed. I can't lead raids and run a city. If I go down, we're fucked. Like every other man I've met, cut and run like a coward, and then leave a more capable woman in charge." So, Alexander Velasco, do I get to stay? Vixer asked. Alex set his mug down and reached for a cigarette in his jacket. He placed it in his mouth and lit it and looked over at Janet. Don't ask me, Captain. I don't run the city. I'm just here to make sure scum doesn't take it back. Vixer sneered at him before looking at Janet. She stays, Alex. You're gonna have to live with it, just like you would if the old man was still alive. Alex ashed his cigarette out on the table. Just let me know when you want my side of the news. With that, Alex and Layla made their way back towards their rooms, while Janet fell back into her seat. Vale joined her, as did Vixer. What a nice man, the captain said. Easy on the eyes, too, but the idealism kills it for me. Vixer reached for a cigarette of her own. Careful who you tell that to, Janet warned. Oh, I will be. At least until I grow wings. Just once I'd like to not jump from one shitty situation to another, Alex said as he laid back on his bed. Starting in with the regret already? Layla asked from the shower. No, I just think my news might be worse than Janet's. She wants us to help build. I get the feeling she meant structures, not an army. Alex could hear the stream of water from the shower turn off, and after a minute, Layla walked back into the room wrapped in a towel with steam following her heels. This has something to do with Jack's journal, doesn't it? She asked as she plopped down beside him. I don't know yet. I'll explain it all when Janet wants to listen, instead of throwing her new friends in my face. Building an army, Layla echoed. Yeah. Jack seemed to think there would be more to deal with after Morrison, but having an entire army, Alex trailed. That means he was expecting a much bigger threat. Or maybe all he could see was war, Alex, Layla said with a sigh. Before they could continue, there was a knock at the door. Alex looked at Layla, but she shrugged. Come in. It was Janet. She propped open the door and came in alone. I left Tyrese down with Keeley. Who? Layla asked. Captain Vixer. Do I not warrant getting dressed for? I would have waited. You saw more of me on the Hell Chopper, Layla replied. Janet just shook her head. Whatever, we can talk about admiring your form later. Anyway, it got contentious down there. Are you two all right? Better than Vixer's jaw, Alex answered. Look, I told you what you needed to know. Now it's your turn. Alex sat up and draped his arms over his knees. You know, it's nice to be back here in the room. Familiar smells, sounds. And on the coast there was beauty everywhere. Lots of it wasn't destroyed like out here, but it wasn't home. This fucked up place, with all the death and all the loss, is home. I couldn't stay away. Janet grabbed a chair in the corner of the room. It's the same for me, Alex. But you have to understand something. I've done my best with what was left, but every day the situation in the city gets worse. I might have left like you two, but I saw that fire in the refugees' eyes. The same fire I saw when I met you, Alex. The fire of people who'd rather suffer with freedom than die on their knees. Alex felt shamed by that. He had led a revolution, but didn't know what to do with it when he'd killed the tyrant. So what changed? Janet asked. Why did you come back? Alex reached over his nightstand and held up 2 books. These belong to the old man. One is a journal, and one is a contact book. The journal is filled with ravings, notes, and guesswork. Some of that was about other people, maybe even nations he wanted to recruit. For the mission? Janet asked. It seemed like that at first, but now I'm not so sure. I haven't read too far into it, but if what I'm pulling from his writing is correct, he might have been preparing for another threat. Who? I'll let you know when I find out. What's important right now is making sure the city is prepared and ready for anything. We'll start with Morrison's remnant. We deal with them, and then we go find what Jack was looking for. At the very least, it helps us secure the city. What about after? We come back and wait? Janet pressed. No, we go and find an old friend that saved our lives, Alex replied. Mikhail, Layla said. We're going to need him if we're going to fulfill a promise Jack made, Alex added. Janet put a hand on her forehead and looked down at her boots. China. Shit. Alex, how many suicide missions do you think you have before a stray bullet finally brings you down? You know that doesn't matter. She helped us and we owe her for that. She wouldn't have joined unless the old man promised her father Beijing. We will deliver on that, Alex replied. It's going to force the council to recognize New Purgatory. If Beijing gets wiped off the map, Australia and Russia gain more sway in the power vacuum. They can stop making their own moves rather than being dictated to, Layla added. They already have more sway with New Purgatory not having a seat, but that's not the point. The three of us are really going to put a new team together and run around like the Crusaders again? Janet asked as she reached into her pockets, pulling out several dog tags of those lost at Morrison's tower. This was their fate. Alex reached into his own jacket and pulled out 3 more tags. Dell, Otto, and Ty's. You still have Eli's? I keep it around my neck with mine, and his gun on my hip, Janet answered. Those ones here are Jack's, Nayala's, and Brandon's. My guess is that Mikhail has Tommy's if he cared that much to keep it. This was never meant to be easy, Janet, but I've got a good feeling about what Jack put in these books. He left those here for a reason, Alex said. Janet stood up and made for the door. I'll relay all this to Tyrese and Vixer. Bring Gates up to speed if he isn't already. If we do this, it will be done right. The soldiers we can't turn from the remnant will need to be killed. I can't risk them continuing to hit my people. Yes, ma'am, Alex replied. Thinking about my past mistakes and how to rectify them brings me no comfort. I find myself planning most days and nights and wonder where the hours go, or how many times I've emptied my glass. I have an impressive number of contacts. My father always told me that there was nothing wrong with having too many friends, because they would turn into the people that could help you out when you needed them the most. Some of them owe me favors, but nothing as grand as what I will ask of them. I've never been a good man, and the debt I incur on these people will cost them their lives, and in the end, cost me my own. It had to come to this. I'm a man that has always accomplished his goals. The cost, the pain, the loss, it's all part of the job. I have no regrets on that front. It's this new group that I can barely call men and women. They're kids, my kids, and I'm damning them for the same life I have had to endure. I hope Alex and Janet can understand. They'll take the reins when all this is finished. Alex might not want to lead beyond what we accomplish, but he was born for it. He's never been out for his own glory and lets his actions be his example to follow. Janet will be more than the soldier she so desperately wanted to emulate in her own father. She has a revolutionary's ambition, and the steel of any general I've ever met. She'll be his commander. I've done what I could to make them see me for what I am, so they might not become me. But every goal that pushes us closer to our mark reveals a truth I can't ignore. The personal and emotional cost of every battle, every friend gunned down, and every sliver of sanity stripped away by the constant fear of death. They could be part of bringing our home back to order, free, what Dellin, Otto, and I fought for so long. That has a cost, the sacrifice of everyone they know and love, including themselves. That isn't easy to live with. I've tried. There comes a moment when you wish a stray bullet would catch you in the head, or an assassin would have the dignity to slit your throat in your sleep. There's no such luck for those that want to save the world. The hubris of that alone is enough to bring anyone down. I need them to make it through, and to recover. I can't do this alone anymore. Alex flipped Jack's journal closed as his eyes began to betray him. He wondered if Jack had left the journal not as a warning of another threat, but as a warning of the horrors Alex would face if he continued a life of war. He didn't need to be reminded of the guilt that ate away at his heart. He had hoped it would go away with time. Alex understood even before reading Jack's journal that it was a fool's hope. Alex saw his own journal, the old one, tattered, nearly destroyed, and sitting on a desk across from his bed. The journal where he put his life had saved his life. Its closing chapter was covered in John Morrison's blood. It summed up everything inside and out. He turned his head and for a while watched Layla sleep. Alex found himself wondering if he should have ended when the journal did, and if that would have been better for the world. He let that feeling go. Jack had been wrong about many things in the brief time Alex had met him. He hoped he was wrong about losing loved ones, about losing oneself. Jack lost them because he was willing to let them die after he used them. Alex hoped the horrors Jack described would never affect him in that way. Gates decided to leave his room in the middle of the night at the bar. He was still astounded by the place, the music that thumped in his chest, the massive amount of people alive instead of dead in a pile, the lights that must have been painstakingly placed a tile at a time on the floors and walls. To Gates, it was like the war hadn't existed out here. There were people everywhere, light fixtures that worked, running water, heating, and air conditioning. He almost wasn't sure if civilization was a type of life he would ever get used to again. At least not without being in awe every time he wanted to shower or didn't have to dig a latrine. Sam went up to the bar. A scantily clad waitress sauntered over to him, eyeing him up. It had been too long since he'd really looked at a woman, especially one that bared herself with a top cut too low, midriff bare, and shorts that hugged the curves of her body tightly. "Can I get you something, baby?" she asked. "Whiskey," Sam replied. "Top or bottom?" "I like to start at the top and work my way down." The bartender smiled at him and then walked away for his drink. He hadn't noticed that Janet was now sitting on the bar stool beside him. "Smooth," she said before sipping at a beer. "I hope you're not like that all the time." "Like what?" Gates asked as the bartender set the drink in front of him. Janet waved her off when she mentioned the bill. "A smooth talker with more balls than sense. Last one of those I knew ended up with 200 bullets and shards of glass lodged in his body." "Make a lot of judgments on people you just met?" Gates asked, turning to face her. "Sometimes I've got to know if my life is in their hands. Other times they die before I get the chance to know them." Gates drained his drink and set it on the countertop. "Well, I'm sure you don't know a thing about me, Mr. Shella. It's fine, though. I'm happy to talk your ear off." "What makes you think I care?" "You're talking to me, aren't you?" "My turn to make a judgment. Control. The reason you're clutching your beer so hard your knuckles are turning white, or why your boots are laced tight enough to cut off blood flow to your knees. I can't blame you. I wouldn't want an out-of-town renegade running roughshod over my city." "Is that what you are? A renegade?" Janet asked. "No, I'm just a survivor trying to fit himself back into a society he thought was long dead. But I understand your concern. Cheers." The bartenders came over and filled Gates' glass again. He held it up. Janet lifted hers and they clinked it together. Gates finished the glass again. "Is something you do often?" Gates asked. "What's that? Try to get to know people by being abrasive as possible? Or are you purposely trying to intimidate them?" "Most of the time my charm is enough for them to only want to talk to me once. I'm not one for making friends," Janet answered. "Alex and Layla seem to disprove that. Those two didn't have much of a choice. Neither did I, come to think of it. It helps that I don't mind them too much either." "They're good people. Saved my life," Gates replied as he motioned for another drink. "Yeah, I know the feeling," Janet said. "Only cost him a finger, this time. Do I even want to know?" "That depends on whether you want to enjoy steak ever again, or whatever passes for steak out here." "Yeah, I'm not touching that one." Gates smiled as another drink came his way. He choked it down and then waved off the bartenders for another. "Nice getting to talk with you," Sam said as he stood up from his stool. "Call me duly charmed." Janet watched as Gates walked away to explore the rest of the club. She found herself confused yet intrigued by Gates, and that was not a bad feeling to have at all. "Getting to know our new guest?" Vale asked as he moved towards the bar. Janet shrugged. Gates was not at all what she expected. She figured anyone that traveled with Alex was either a hotshot or an asshole. It was a pleasant surprise to be wrong twice. "He's nothing to worry about," Janet said as she reached into her flight jacket. "Here, these are from Alex." Janet placed the remaining dog tags in Tyrese's hands. "Only one missing is the one that's hooked next to mine." Vale gave her a nod. "I understand. I'll get what we talked about set up." "Thanks, Ty. I'll see you in the morning." Janet watched him leave and waited for someone else to talk to her as she slammed beer after beer. No one did. Vixer had likely gone to be with her troops, and Alex and Layla were sleeping. She wished she could sleep too, but the chances of that were slim. Instead, she decided to take a walk of her own outside. She began a stroll down the road, deeper in the entertainment district. Many of the bars had been going through rebuilds since the new war ended. None of them had been as popular as Alon's foes or attracted the same underground element. It was the revolutionary bar, as some patrons put it. The district had originally been set up to cater to the rich in Morrison's towers. Most that still lived in his skyscrapers didn't dare leave. Janet had chosen to leave those people alone. Morrison had given those rich civilians everything. Eventually, they would need the help of others to survive. The refugees were retaking the city a day at a time. She wondered how long it would last and what threat Alex was so worried about. The sound of rifle fire made her duck into the nearest alley, a trained reflex from too much time spent at war. When she looked around, she saw it wasn't aimed at her, but further down the road she could see Marines. Hitting another caravan. Motherfuckers. Janet moved up the street past the boarded-up bars of the district's exterior, but what she saw wasn't a caravan ambush. It was Marines fighting Marines, with Vixer right in the middle. Janet double-clicked her comm and tapped into the ex-Marine's frequency. Need a hand, Captain? Janet asked as she raised her rifle. Don't shoot the ones with gray X's across their chest and back, Vixer replied. Those ones are mine. That was all Janet needed. With her rifle brought to bear, she laid into Morrison's remnant one trigger pull at a time. She put each helmeted enemy in line with her scope. Bullets flew by, smashing into the boards and makeshift walling behind her. She was exposed, though not as much as Vixer's people, who were using overturned cars spread in a circle as cover in the middle of an old intersection. Janet sprinted for Vixer. Bullets started coming towards her again before she reached the cars. She slid hard on the back of her right thigh as bullets slammed against her new cover. Shit, that's gonna burn later. Nice mess you have here, Janet said. Vixer didn't reply. Instead, she leaned up over the car and pinpointed a Marine in the neck. You could have waited until tomorrow to prove your loyalty. Janet pushed herself off the ground to stand and fire off more shots. She swung her rifle to the left and then right. It became apparent to her that they were being surrounded. Janet knew that soon their cover would mean fuck all. Where the hell are they all coming from? We might have lured them here, Vixer replied as she tossed a stinger grenade over her shoulder. The explosion sent hot shrapnel over their heads. The two went back to firing, but more of the remnant kept rushing from down the road. The sight of several soldiers hitting the ground in the distance caught Janet's eye. She heard no other rifles but her own and the ones bearing down on her. A bullet ripped across her waist, forcing her back down into cover. Fucking shit, she yelled out, bringing a hand to cover the blood oozing from the wound. Vixer dropped down to look at her. Skimmed you. Stay. Janet had noticed much of the firing had stopped. Vixer stood back up and watched as the remnant retreated as fast as they had arrived. Down, Vixer finished. Janet forced herself up and walked with Vixer out onto the street. She took a glance back at the makeshift cover the captain and her people had created. It made sense for facing an enemy that would swarm on all sides. Clever idea, Janet said as she ripped off a piece of her shirt and wrapped it around her wrist. Not clever enough. We would have died. We should have died. It looks like we have a savior. Vixer bent down over a fallen soldier's body and ripped an arrow out of its neck. Did you call for backup? You mean between the time I stumbled into this shit and getting shot? No, I was too busy trying not to die, Janet replied. Vixer shook her head. That's when Sam Gates jumped down from a fire escape across from their cover. You people keep it exciting around here, I'll say that much for civilization, he said, walking towards them. What a waste of ammo. Gates plucked the arrow out of Vixer's hand and placed it back in the quill at his waist. Who the hell is this guy? Vixer asked. Alex picked him up. I wonder why you weren't carrying a gun, Janet replied. Sam Gates, miss, he said, extending his hand. Captain Keeley Vixer. She did not extend her own. Gates squinted his eyes. U.S. military? Vixer raised an eyebrow at him, looked over at Janet, who shook her head, then back at Gates. You're not from around here, are you? What gave it away? Gates asked. Tell you what, let's get Janet stitched up and I'll answer whatever questions you have, Vixer said. Fair enough, though you might regret that. The night doctor had been in a drunken sleep and Vixer didn't have the patience for doing stitches, so instead Gates went to work on Janet's arm. The three were sitting at the oak table in the war room. It's been a while since I've been able to use sterile medical equipment, Gates said. Boiling needles and bleaching used gauze doesn't guarantee healthy treatment. Jana was drinking from a bottle of whiskey, while Gates worked from the tip of her elbow up to her wrist. She didn't cry out, but flinched every time he pierced the needle in her skin. "You've done this a lot, then?" Vixer asked as she disassembled her rifle. "Yep, back when I traveled with the group. An old doc showed me the basics. I had a feeling I'd need that skill. Told me a great trick," Gates explained. "What was that?" Janet asked between pulls from the bottle. "Not getting into situations like this in the first place. Out here you've got all sorts of supplies. In the wastes, even a skinned knee can make you lose a leg," Sam replied. Janet shook her head. "Yeah, I've been up the coast. I get the idea." "You were going to answer some questions, Captain?" Gates asked, changing the subject. "I wasn't in the U.S. military, but my parents were. I joined Morrison's Marines when I was old enough to hold a rifle." Janet turned her body hard towards Keeley, nearly ripping Gates' needle out of her arm. "Hey, easy," Gates said. "Your parents were military?" Janet asked. "Didn't I just say that? They were both Marines. Mom died in New Orleans during the bombings. Dad retired before Morrison took over the city." "And you still joined?" Janet pressed. "What the hell was I supposed to do? I was 16 when I signed up. My dad and I needed a place to sleep. We needed to eat. It was either that or... "Or what?" Janet said, her accusing words dripping venom. "Or live on the street getting caught by the rape gangs, or forcibly recruited anyway," Vixer finished. Gates ended his stitching and then dressed Janet's arm. He wondered what the two were on about. This place's history was already beginning to confuse him. When the dressing was done, Janet grabbed her bottle and made way for her room. But before she got there, she turned back over to Gates and Vixer. "What happened to your father, Captain?" Keeley winced and looked the other way. Gates could see that Janet had hit a nerve, be it inadvertent or otherwise. He stood up, ready to jump between them if necessary. "Alexander happened to my father. He was in the tower when it went up. So yeah, everything I did to help him went down the drain in one fucked up evening." Keeley fell into one of the chairs around the oak table, the proper accent she fought to keep up fading as she spoke. "You happy now?" Janet shook her head. "No." She slammed the door to her bedroom behind her. Gates' eyes went wide. Then he sat back down inside, letting his body relax in the chair. "Why do I feel like I just stepped into a pool of bad blood?" Vixer looked over at him. "Because you did. Suppose this isn't all bad, though. You don't have a reason to hate me, and I don't have a reason to hate you." "The way you say it makes it sound like I should. Should I?" "Maybe for the people I associated myself with. My Marines and I worked for the tyrant they killed. A lot of people in this city look at us with disdain, and as much as I hate to say it, with good reason. There were platoons out there that did terrible shit, and were ordered to do terrible shit. They broke up families, committed cold-blooded murder, and worse. The rapes that happened weren't just from the gangs." "And you were part of all that?" Gates asked. Vixer paused for a moment. She looked down at the empty clip she had pulled from her rifle before she set it to the side. "I'm not sure how to answer that, Gates." "You either were or you weren't." Vixer shook her head. "It isn't that easy. Shit happened, yeah, but I never paid any attention to it. I followed orders and ignored the rest. Fuck, can you ask me anything else? I don't want to rethink those times." Gates pulled off his latex gloves. "When I think of something else, I'll let you know. Right now I could do with some sleep." Gates got up and made for Tyler McGrath's old room. Vixer sat atop the oak table and looked around at her surroundings. This was where they had planned her end, the end to everything she had given her life to everything she had known, and they succeeded. Yet it was a simple room with simple people, with emotions just like her. Somehow, in the tragedy of what this room represented to her, she found that comforting. Alexander woke up early and hit the shower before Layla could get to it. When he got out and dried off, he was happy to see several sets of new fatigues in his dresser. Janet had known he would come back and took care of him and Layla for their return. By the time he made his way out to the table, Layla was just stirring from bed. Alex moved to sit at his place at the head of the table. He looked over the bloodied map in the center. He wanted to move it, roll it up, or hang it on the wall. But then Alex thought better of it. That map belonged there. So had Mikhail's blade, but instead he wore it now. He hoped he could return that symbol to his friend. He knew it meant a whole hell of a lot more to the Shadow, but its placement had been indicative of the suicide mission's reality. It's a clusterfuck, isn't it? Janet asked as she moved to one of the chairs. Alex noticed the bandaging on her arm. What the hell happened to you? If I told you I got into a bar fight, would you believe me? Probably. Janet shook her head. There was a remnant ambush. Vixer was doing a patrol and I went to help while I was out wandering. Gates saved our asses. Stitched me up, too. He's a survivor. I'm glad he joined us. I'm also glad you're all right, Alex replied. Janet nodded, then tapped her comm a few times. Some of the workers Alex recognized from downstairs brought in coffee and a few bagels. Not the same as the last few meals Jack gave us, but it's something. That's another problem, Janet said. The rest of the team slowly filled into their chairs while Vixer appeared in the doorway. Do I get to be in the meeting, or should I wait outside? Alex extended a hand towards one of the chairs. He noticed her voice had changed. The proper tone of the tower had faded somewhere in the background. Vixer took her place at the table. As everyone sat down, Alex put a hand to the back of his neck and gripped it. He looked at the faces of friends, allies, and others, both new and old. But in the empty chairs, he only saw ghosts. I don't expect a single meeting to solve our problems, but we need to put them all in front of us. Layla and I came back to rebuild, but there's another reason we decided to return. In addition to all the other shit it takes to make a city run, we must prepare for the possibility of an attack. According to some info I dug up, there's a good chance that there's more out there than the remnant. Like? Vale asked. The Rangers, for one, Layla responded. We're almost certain they're the ones that killed Brandon. If they were in league with Morrison, then the Council could have them planning strikes. Not likely. The Rangers don't invade, they watch, Vixer said. So who's left? Janet asked. Alex shook his head. Look, I'm not even sure myself, but I've been combing through Jack's old journal. He seemed to be convinced that there was someone else out there who'd try to capitalize on the city being weakened. I'd rather be prepared if that happens. Well, then there's a lot we gotta do. We need to finish the remnant, we've got problems with food, and we have no real army, let alone weapons or ammunition. We keep trying to dig into the old armories, but there's not much left, Janet said. The group sat around the table in silence for a few moments. The problems were large, and it made Alexander wonder what he had stepped back into, and what he had left Janet to deal with. I assume you're using vertical farms? Gates asked. We can't grow food as fast as we consume it, Janet replied. We need livestock too. Beans, greens, and fruit only suffice for so long. You'd be surprised. I'll look at the farms and see if I can improve on anything. Livestock is a whole different issue. If you don't have any on hand, we'll find or steal some. Janet nodded at him. How large is the remnant? Layla asked. My estimates put them around 2 companies, roughly around 300 to 400 soldiers, but we can't be sure, Janet answered. Why do we need rough estimates? Vixer was with them, Alex said. I'm no traitor, Alex. That information... Alex held up a hand. I'm not going to keep going back and forth with you, Captain. If you want what Janet promised, then you give us what you know. If not, take your troops and go back. I've seen too many friends die for any of us to be 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Vixer stared at Alex from across the table. Alex stared back, even though those few moments in silence felt like an eternity. He didn't relent. She was no different than any other Marine he had sighted down. You don't understand us at all, but you pretend you're all heroes. How many Marines did you kill? How many of them were heroes before the war? Vixer asked. The line between hero and murderer becomes blurred when they both claim they were only following orders. They could have seen the evil and fought back, Alex replied. Fought and died like all the soldiers that survived the war that Morrison couldn't convert? They had no choice. Bullshit. That spits in the face of everything my team died for. Everyone has a choice, but it's easier to be a coward killing the unarmed than to fight for what's right. Alex could see that Vixer wouldn't abide. They were too far apart. A soldier and a rebel could never work together side by side. He could tell she was rethinking her decision to come here. I knew this would never work. Vixer started to stand up. Wait, Janet cut in. Do you think they would join us? Janet, no. You want to bring in more of them? Vixer and I can barely sit at a table together. Janet turned her head to her old ally. We need them, Alex. We need an army. With their help, we could train recruits quickly. They'd be a standing force to guard the inner city and the reactor. It was a good point, and Alex knew he didn't have the sway to convince her otherwise. The thought of using Morrison's old Marines, no, killers, made him sick. But he had left this mess at Janet's feet. This was her decision to make. I don't like it, but if it's what you want, I support you, Alex finally said. Fixer? Keeley sat back down in her chair. She hadn't given much thought to recruiting. The Marines that went with her had been under her command. The captain figured anyone who cared enough would follow. She never thought their own leaders might have been holding them back, or worse, threatening them with death. I'll have to put out a few feelers. If it works, then we've got an army, and we might be able to figure out who this mystery invader is. That could take care of our weapon and ammo problems, too. Chances are some of the Marines will know where old caches and storage facilities are. That leaves us with you, Alex. You said the old man had some ideas? Janet said. The ideas aren't solid yet, but I get the feeling he wanted to recruit more specialists while making inroads with other nations not on the council. New Cairo. That's not where I think it is it? We just got here. Now we're going to go halfway across the world? Gates asked. Huh, get used to it, Janet said. Do you know anything about them? Just that Jack was contacted by someone named Maeve Amaris while we were fighting Morrison. Jack said the timing was off, otherwise he might have gone there himself. It's a moot point, though. We can't leave until we're sure the people here will be safe. That means bringing the remnant into the fold. Agreed, Vixer said. The rest of the table nodded, and Alex looked over to Janet. She stared back at him for a moment, confused. Dismissed, boss? Alex said with slight sarcasm, reminding Janet of all the times she had called him that. Dismissed. Captain Vixer was the first to make her exit from the room and left the club to make for the apartment block her platoon had been given. She was leery about attempting to contact the remnant, especially so soon after an ambush, but this was her only chance to save her old comrades, and she knew she couldn't let that opportunity pass her by. If she did, then Alex would get his way and eventually kill them all. When she reached the building, she made for her makeshift office on the first floor. Her Marines were working all around, hauling up old broken stone and cleaning each floor. It had been a good start. With most of the apartment intact, it would serve as a better base than anything out in the wastes. Keeley sat back in an old computer chair and reached for the ham radio on her desk. The remnant still used comms, but not for long-distance communication. They were still too worried about the rebels cracking their communications. Vixer switched the radio on and tuned into their frequency. She was fluttering in her chest like she was waiting for unwelcome news from a doctor. She wasn't sure she had the words for whoever was on the other line. Vixer moved the microphone over to her mouth. Macro IO7 to IO base. Come in, IO base. Vixer waited for a few moments before static crackled in, followed by a voice. IO7 are traitors. This had better be a bad joke. Who am I speaking to? Vixer asked. Irrelevant. I'm asking the questions. Who are you? Captain Vixer oversaw IO7. This is Captain Vixer. Keeley paused. Bluffing a command code might work to bypass a radio operator. If anything, it would let her speak to the Major. I have a clearance code for a deep cover operation. Foxtrot Uniform Charlie Kilo. Yankee Omega Uniform. Another pause. Transferring you over to Major Vera. They were in worse shape than she thought. The operator was either a field marine given the job because the last guy who knew how to work the radio was dead, or had no idea how to read clearance code. The radio crackled to life again. Still pulling your cute tricks, Keeley? Vixer recognized the voice immediately. It was Major Vera, using the same arrogant tone he used to address rookies. Don't blame me for your undertrained staff, Major. Did you like the ambush? Shouldn't be patrolling a main street so close to the entertainment district. Very amateur. It was a size up. The losses were acceptable for the information gathered. Yeah. Is that what you told the soldiers who lost their friends? Did the ones that came back tell you most of the losses came from an archer? Keeley, if you only called to spout nonsense, I'm afraid I don't have the time to... No, Major. I have an offer for you. A chance at peace. Reintegration. The major's side of the line went silent for a few moments. Keeley wondered if he had cut her off. When the radio crackled back to life, she knew it was only muted. Was he considering her offer? "Why now, Captain? What do you know?" the major asked. "I know you're losing a war of attrition. Supplies are dwindling, and the wastes have already been looted. You have two options: leave New Purgatory and head west, or reintegrate with the refugees." "We're not mercenaries like you, Vixer. We will not abandon our duties simply because we're being challenged. Our loyalty was to the man that allowed us to control the city, the same man that kept us all fed and employed, not to mention that took care of your father until the same refugees you've allied yourself with killed him. No, Captain, we would rather die." Vera's words stung, but Vixer had heard worse in the barracks or on the battlefield. She knew the major was a proud man. In many ways he reminded her of her own father, except that their kinship was all professional. "It may come to that, Major. That's why I'm on this end of the radio. But I'm less interested in your opinion. I'd like to know what your troops think." Vixer clicked her radio off, then kicked her feet on the desk. The major would be off balance now, nervous. Keeley knew the major was too arrogant to accept any kind of surrender, but that hadn't interested her from the start. Now she could wage a shadow war, one that would hopefully save more people than it would kill. The captain got an hour of rest before finding a group of Marines and giving them their new orders, infiltrating the remnant hideaway and spreading dissent about the major. That would buy her and the city time and hopefully more soldiers. It would also keep Alex from wiping them out and her becoming a rat. After giving out orders, Vixer decided to make back for her office, but was surprised when she saw Tyrese Vale on her training grounds outside of the apartment block. "Captain," he said, giving her a salute. "Cut the bullshit, Vale. You're not one of my Marines," Vixer replied as she waved him off. "I get your position, Captain. I don't agree with it, but that doesn't mean that I can't treat you with the respect you've earned." "Yeah," Vixer said as she turned her body away and crossed her arms. "Thanks. Why are you here?" "Janet wants to know your plan for getting the Remnant to join us." "I just got off the horn with them a little while ago. The major is ready to die before he surrenders, but I get the feeling that his men aren't. So infiltration is how we're going to get the Marines. I've got a team going in to recruit. That buys us time while Alex gets whatever information he needs. If it doesn't work, or my men are killed, then I'll give him their location, number, and lead the assault myself." Tyrese gave her a nod. "That's more than fair. I'm sure he'll be happy with that. Janice should be pleased too." Vixer nodded, expecting Vale to take off back towards the entertainment district, but he didn't move. "Was there something else, Vale?" Vixer asked. Tyrese reached into his cargo pants and pulled out many chains matted together and coated in gray dust. "The people we have scavenging the tower found these on the bodies of Marines. They wanted to burn them, but I kept them instead. I thought you might want them." The captain was taken back by the gesture. She reached out a hand and hesitantly grabbed the tags. "Why did you do this? You know the Remnant wouldn't do the same for you." "We're not the Remnant, Keeley, and despite how you might feel, neither are you. If we did everything they do now, or what they did for Morrison, then the war had no meaning." For the first time since the two had met, Vixer smiled. "Thank you, Tyrese. I appreciate it." Tyrese smiled back. "You're welcome. Thanks for not pointing a gun at me this time." "No promises next time." Tyrese's smile disappeared, replaced by concern. "A joke," Vixer said with a small laugh. "I'm not too good at them." Janet took Alex and Layla around the parts of the inner city the citizens of New Purgatory had spread out to. Many were still living in the outskirts. They were afraid the Remnant might ambush them if they attempted to move in. All the while, Janet explained the various problems that couldn't be fixed with bullets or arduous work. "Plumbing and energy to the buildings has proved to be the hardest. We can't just start tearing up the roads without equipment to put them back together. Not that any of us know how to route water lines or lay concrete. The quakes ruined most of that infrastructure. Only the entertainment district has viable plumbing." "What about the scientists at the reactor? Don't they know how to route power?" Layla asked. "Sure, but we can't spare them for the work. We can't even get them to be teachers. Some of them are so old they could keel over any day. I have a bad feeling that we might end up going without power if something happens to them. That is, unless we can get some specialists from the other countries." "The only ones that are left are from the other Cloudbreaker countries," Layla said. And they're closed off to us, Alex added. Morrison also had the advantage of using part of his army as labor. We have plenty of refugees that want to help, but it's still not enough, Janet explained. Alex thought for a few moments, but he didn't share. Layla could see the puzzlement on his face. He wasn't a builder. Elias or Jack would have been more comfortable in a situation like this. Layla knew it. Alex? Layla asked. Talia's people, Alex finally said. Would they even be willing to relocate? Janet asked. I don't know, Alex replied. But if her father plans on blowing Beijing, he has to know it's going to make the place uninhabitable. The fallout could spread to Tianjin. Does that even matter? It's not like we have a cargo plane to carry an entire city back. Even then it would take more than that, Janet said. We don't need everyone, just a few that can train our own people in building, getting things on track, Alex replied. Just another reason to go after Mikhail. The new tin can we picked up out west is even smaller than Morrison's old bird. Mikhail has the troop carrier, Layla added. Also, there must be a handful of engineers within the remnant. Not all of them could be soldiers. That should hold us over until we can find support from somewhere else, Alex concluded. Janet gave the two of them a hesitant nod and led them deeper into the city. Alex noted that the infrastructure looked nicer, but it was coated in ashes. The gray and brown dust couldn't hide the blackened exterior of the still-standing skyscrapers. They stopped in front of the largest pile of refuse Alex had seen since Yankee Stadium. Ground Zero, Janet said. What's left of Morrison's tower. I've had people combing it since it fell, and we're still finding bodies. Alex didn't move, nor did Layla. He had not seen the destruction he had created, not up close. It brought him back to that rainy night when the tower collapsed. This was the result, an incomprehensible amount of death reduced to twisted metal, dust, and ash. How many are dead? 1,000? More? We've been using old construction equipment to clear away the rubble, but it's a long way from being clean. With the attacks, I've only got a skeleton team of volunteers. Janet stopped when she realized she was talking to herself. Alex and Layla were 5 meters behind her. The weight of all the death and the fallen colossus had no longer bothered her, but this was the first time her friends were seeing the destruction they had wrought together. She moved back over to them. Maybe we should head back. No, Alex replied, putting one foot in front of the other. I need to see. Layla kept pace after him, but he wasn't looking at the building. He was looking at the sky. What are you looking at? She asked. We're in a small group of people that have seen the skyline without the tower blocking the view. I don't know. Layla grabbed him by the arm and held on. He was trying to escape the pain, the violence, just as Elias would have. The truth of a 400-meter tombstone was too much to handle. They stood there for a time until the sun fell from the sky, and shadows cast across the ash. 3 days passed until Vixer's troops returned with 3 squads of defectors. 60 soldiers out of 400 Major Vera had. It was a good start, but it wasn't an army, and not even close to the number Vixer had hoped. The captain left her apartment block and made for Alonsfo's, chewing a piece of leather from an old belt while she strolled past all the citizens busy with their cleaning, hauling, and cooking. She remembered parts of the old world. People conducted all sorts of business in their homes or in shops. Now the world resembled a giant market. Shelter was too precious to use for anything other than housing. There were tents set up in the streets, some attached by lines that held up old, stained clothing, while other lines hung dried meats and fish. Some of the stalls set up sold vegetables from co-ops the citizens had set up, or the vertical farms built in the still-standing skyscrapers. The smell of food cooked in oil through the shit smell of latrines and old clothes. It reminded her of living in Major Vera's camp. A strange nostalgia she was unsure if she would ever shake. When she reached the entrance to Alonsfo's, Sam Gates was waiting by the door. Vixer had the feeling he hated the bright lights and loud music as much as she did. To her, places like this were a slap in the face of all the work the people in the open were doing. Had its owners been tyrants, she might have launched her own crusade, but that was not the case. Keeley reminded herself that she needed to be more trusting, and that places like this were necessary for planning, and for those same people outside to come and blow off steam, to find some balance of the new world with the old. Good news? Gates asked as he followed her inside. You'll know in a minute, Vixer replied. Actually, I was hoping to get your ear. Vixer stopped and turned towards him. Okay, what? I might have found out how many soldiers you picked up, and I know that's not going to be enough. Not just to help, but to please Alex. I also know you have a map of the outskirts. Shadowing me, Gates. I have nothing better to do. Look, you want Alex to trust you, right? That gives you and your soldiers a place here so you can survive. I'm willing to bet I can get more folks to join you. Not remnant, but adding to your numbers is better than nothing. How? Gates smiled at her. Think about it. Keeley looked off to the side. It only took her a few moments to work out what Gates was pitching, and it made sense coming from him. He was an outsider, after all. All she wondered was how Alex would take it. How does this benefit you? It benefits us all. I want them to be able to trust you, and I know you want to trust them too. Otherwise you wouldn't be here, right? Keeley nodded at him. Yeah, but it's going to take more than a few soldiers at our flank. Well, I hope that's where your plan comes in, Gates replied. It does. I just didn't think it would come to this, Keeley said as she rubbed her temples. Gates set a hand on her shoulder. Vixer wanted to recoil, but didn't. Gates stuck out his other hand. I trust you, Vix. Do you trust me? Vixer looked down at Sam's hand and tried to remember her conversation with Tyrese. She shook his hand, then the two made their way up to the rooms. Alex was sitting at the head of the table with Layla, a full cup of untouched coffee sitting in front of him, and his fingers constantly tapping against the oak. His stomach was twisting on itself, and he knew coffee would make it worse. It was a mix of anger, confusion, sadness, and nervousness. It had all hit him at once when he saw the ruins of Morrison's tower, the culmination of all he and his team's efforts. He knew Layla could see all those emotions written on his face. Alex didn't even bother trying to hide them these days. It wasn't worth it to try, but she didn't say anything. She watched him as he kept tapping his fingers on the oak and staring at the steam coming off his coffee mug, until she finally grabbed it herself and took a sip. It's all right, she said as she pulled the mug to her lips. We're past that now. I know, Alex replied. You don't look like you do. Alex didn't know how to respond in a way that wouldn't end in a fight. They had more of those these days. Each time they became worse and worse. He would say something, she would counter, he would get angry, and she would win. But Alex could never win the fight with his head, even if everything Layla would say made sense. The reconciliation was replaced by doubt. You're right, he finally said, giving her a fake smile and hoping she wouldn't see right through him. Before Layla could reply, Vixer and Gates walked in. Where are the other two? Vixer asked. No idea where Tyrese is, but Janet's washing off. Should be out in a minute, Alex replied. Gates sat down in one of the chairs, but Vixer crossed her arms and leaned on the wall near the door, waiting. Tyrese entered a few minutes later, panting and out of breath. Alex reached for his rifle on the table. Alex! Oh, shit! Tyrese said, struggling to get air into his lungs. You need to get out front. Now. Alex didn't need to be told twice. The rest of the team, save Janet, followed him downstairs. The hellchopper that was landing on the street in front of Alonsfo's cleared out the crowd outside of the bar. Alex didn't recognize it as McHale's that he had hoped. Tents were being flung into the air by the wind, produce and clothes scattered onto the ground with people desperately chasing after their goods. Alex took a few steps closer to the bird as it hit the ground. The ramp descended and he stopped in front of the hellchopper. A woman walked out. Both of her legs were replaced by armatures Alex had never seen before. They looked like legs, but their movement was robotic. Alexander Velasco, I'm Captain Renata Carver, she said, moving off the ramp and taking a few steps towards him. Alex hefted his rifle up and pointed it towards her. She had no soldiers behind her, which made him curious. He wondered who the hell would come all this way just to see him. Someone wants to speak with you. The woman placed a grenade-shaped item on the ground. After a few seconds, a hologram of a man appeared in front of him. The woman had stepped back into the hellchopper. The image was a mix of blues and greens and became clearer as each moment passed. Alex could see the full head of white hair, a paunchy body sitting in a wheelchair, and an unblemished but wrinkled face materializing. Ah, the image began. You are the one who killed John. You are the man who took an old movement and turned it into a cause. A revolution with zero consideration for the future. Harnessed chaos that devolved into what it started as. Who are you? Alex asked, slinging his rifle across his back.
The man who is going to end your false crusaders, though usually I'm known as Dr. Thomas Baruga. Perhaps you've heard of me.
Shit, Alex heard from behind him. It was Tyrese's voice. You're welcome to try, Alex replied. It's clear you want New Purgatory, but what point is there in taking it back?
Ha! I am glad you asked, my friend. It provides me an opportunity to instruct you on the proper usage of history,
Baruga replied. Not much to be proper about, Doctor. We waged a crusade, but the Crusaders are dead. You're trying to kill ghosts.
I am trying to kill a movement predicated on a lie. Tell me, Alex, how familiar are you with the actual Crusaders?
I've read bits and pieces here and there. Not easy, considering the kind of ruler your friend John was. But they were knights that fought to take back land they considered their own.
A fair analysis for a child, but you are only partly correct. They were used to take back holy land from those they thought were infidels. Now you might find that like your cause, but I see you on a different side of a different crusade.
And that is?
Reconquista. It was one of the last crusades before the discovery of America. The Portuguese and Spanish, or those who would eventually become the Portuguese and Spanish, lost all their land to the Moors, a group of Muslims that took it all in the name of rebellion. Over the span of nearly 800 years, the Moors were expelled by the last of the Crusaders. They were murdered in the streets, enslaved, or sent off to sea to die.
Alex crossed his arms. You have a point to this?
A friendly tale with a fair warning. Less violent than the one you gave John, but effective. Your nation is a vote I need to stay in power, to make the other nations know my leadership will not be toppled by upstarts. I know you and your group too well to believe they will stand with me, and I have no interest in allying with you when you stand on land that belongs to me.
You're right about one thing. I would never stand with anyone who pulled John Morrison's strings. You saw what happened here and you let it go. You're just as much of a murdering fuck as he was. Baruger smiled and nodded.
Your barbarism will be met at the end of a gun barrel, Alexander Velasco. Be warned, my soldiers are coming, and they will be more fearsome than the ones you faced in the tower.
The image of Baruger winked away, and the engines of the Hell Chopper roared. Within a few moments it took off, burning lines in the sky. Alex let out a sigh and brought a hand up to his head. The old man had been right. There was another threat, only this time an attack would be coming from a nation he knew next to nothing about. The team sat around the table in silence, uneasy and unsure of what they had just witnessed. Alex's nervous feelings had been replaced with disgust. He had hoped Jack just meant the remnant, maybe an outlying general with a reasonable force, but not another country. That would mean war, true war, on a scale not seen since before the bombs dropped. Thoughts? He asked aloud to everyone at the table. No one replied. Even Vixer was sitting down. Alex knew whatever news she had, good, bad, or indifferent, would be eclipsed by the revelation of Berlin's involvement. Vixer let out a sigh. It's not much, but I have news from the remnant. 60 of their soldiers abandoned them last night on a patrol and have joined my platoon. It leaves Major Vera with around 300 to 340 troops if you consider his losses from the skirmish. Thank you, Captain. That will be a significant boost to our forces, Alex said, keeping his voice as even as possible. There was one other thing, Vixer said. Go ahead. I have a few maps of settlements that are outside the city, others outside of the state. These are places Morrison didn't attack, but they were on his radar for the future. Gates wants to use these to bring our army more recruits. Raider camps, Janet said, working it out quickly. You can't find civilian camps unless you head at least 200 miles in any other direction. There's a reason Morrison bypassed those camps, Keeley. I know, but eventually they'll wipe each other out or they'll start raiding inside the city. Gates thinks they'll listen to another survivor, and if they're tribal, they can be brought back into line, Vixer replied. Janet kicked her feet up on the table and crossed her arms. Normally I'd be the first to oppose this. Can you train raiders? Will they even listen to you? Most of the tribals I've met are pigs, but if you give them a good enough show of force, then they know who to follow and who to listen to. They're survivors from the war and beyond. It's a chance we must take. It will build a larger army, and if we're lucky, we find a few people who know a thing or two about medicine, maybe even construction." "You agreed to this, Sam?" Layla asked. "Came up with the idea, really. Vic's just filled in the blanks. I need a couple of days' ration, water, maybe some medicine or clothing to trade. I'll come back with another part of the army. Or I'll be dead. Either way, you'll know what we can or can't do." Alex nodded. He knew they didn't have many options, but they needed soldiers to guard this place if they were going out of the country again. It wasn't a solid plan, but it was the only one they had. "Okay, Gates recruits the local raiders. With the troops you brought in, where does that leave us with the remnant?" Alex asked. There was a long pause. Keeley could feel every set of eyes in that room fall on her. She recalled the events of the past weeks. Here she was, sitting with those that had once been the enemy, with those that had been responsible for the murder of her father. And now they were allies, and her and her people's only chance of survival. She took a deep breath, exhaled, and looked up at Alex eye to eye. "We assassinate the Major," she announced. Alex stared back at Vixer. That was a move he hadn't anticipated from her, but he could see the logic in it. With the Major gone, it was possible that those that survived would see the benefit of reintegration, though now he really did miss Mikhail. "Okay, who does that?" he asked. "Most of us have or had our names on wanted posters up until the tower went down." "I'll do it," Vale spoke up. "In and out, I can leave a message. No one will know until I'm gone." "Tyrese, that's too risky. It would be easier if—" Janet started to say. "I've got this," Tyrese cut in. "It's better than starting another war. It'll be like what happened in S4 when you all got started. They'll join us, scatter, or die." Janet looked over at Alex. He smiled. They both knew that their old group had been infected with new blood that wanted to take the reins and move them forward. Janet wondered if Alex was proud of that, or worried about what they had created. "Sounds like something you would have planned," she said, still looking towards Alex. Alex didn't reply. He just kept tapping his fingers on the oak table. "Get what you need, Gates. You too, Tyrese. Then get going as soon as you can. We're going to need all the time we can get," Alex said as he pushed his chair away from the table and glanced over at Janet. "Dismissed." Alex didn't get up from the table after the rest of the team had up and gone, including Layla. He was caught up on what Beruger had said. He knew the scientist meant to shake his confidence, and it had worked. The German had been so confident that he revealed himself, all to make them more afraid of an attack they were not ready for. He reached into his jacket and tossed out Jack Newsom's journal. He was nearly finished with it and wondered if the big reveal was all that was left. That Germany was the threat hidden in the shadows, that it was them who would try to reclaim New Purgatory, all so they could have another vote on the council. "Everything I have I left with them. I'll have Alonso leave the journal out in the open. Hopefully Alex will get to it. Maybe he'll see that there was more to the story than I let on. I figure he'll appreciate the note. He needs that to get him through what comes next. But the journal is for what comes after. That's not a burden I can put on him now. He and his team have enough to worry about. I just wish I had more to give him. Lord knows I've tried, but the time I need has finally run out. China is too focused on itself. The Russians are dying out. Jerusalem has no interest in expansion anymore. That leaves the Rangers and Berlin. I know Morrison has ties to the Outback, but even the Aussies know better than to trust him outright. Berlin has been quiet, but they've always been quiet. They vote with New Purgatory, but I can't find the hook. Beruger doesn't run the country, and Eberhardt was an ineffective leader before the war. If it's not either of those countries, then I don't know who it could be. That makes me feel like I've failed, like I wasted 10 years plotting to kill a man whose end might not change anything. I may as well be setting these kids up for something worse. It's hard not to believe that, especially when I don't have the answers I need. Of course, maybe I'm just a rambling old man, too deep in his cups and too scarred in the eyes by the world around him. There's good in every ending. I've just lost sight of that. This is Jack Newsom's final written record. December something or other, 2036. Ramblings and theories. Nothing but more hints at greater truths he didn't understand, just like everything else the old man had said and done. But Alex knew that his life would have been easier were Newsom still alive. "I wouldn't worry about it too much. It always gets easier." Alex looked up and saw a man he had never laid eyes on before. His rifle was in reach, and he still had Mikhail's knife at his side. Alex brought his hands down from the table and reached for the blade. "Easy there, Alex," the man said, holding up his hands. "If I wanted to kill you, we wouldn't be talking. Or maybe we would, but I wouldn't have my accent." "You're a ranger," Alex replied. "Correct. It's nice to see what your people have done with the city. Certainly feels more welcoming than Morrison's vision of New Purgatory. I didn't do shit to make it look this way, but I'm willing to bet you knew that already." "I don't," the ranger said innocently, "but whoever is assigned to you probably does. But not everyone disagreed with what Lieutenant Highgraven did. Command blacklisted her to keep up appearances. She overstepped her authority, but to those of us that serve in the field, she is a hero." Alex shook his head. "And my sniper you killed? Was that just to keep up appearances too?" "Not my call, Alex. No one thought you would kill John Morrison, let alone destroy his tower. To stay neutral, we had to come to his assistance when a known terrorist group was attacking him. That doesn't mean we stayed to go down with the building. Yeah, being opportunistic makes it all okay when my friends lie in their graves. One day I'll make whoever gave that order answer for that decision." Alex replied. "Perhaps, Alex, but not now. My name is Yanis, and today I'm playing messenger for a friend of yours in China. In no capacity am I here for the Rangers or Australia." "Talia. Your friend said she's ready for the return of the Broken Cross, so that it may be made whole again." "Yeah, I'm sure she is," Alex replied. "Now you're going to send a message for me. Tell your people that more war is coming, and that they're in league with our new enemy. We'll go after them just like we did John Morrison." Yanis was taken back for a moment. He tilted his head back and looked at Alex down his nose. "I'd curb that ambition of yours, Velasco. Revolutionaries turn to murderers when confidence turns to arrogance." "Then you should tell your general that we're not the kind of people to forgive those that confidently sit on the sidelines. Get the fuck out of my home," Alex replied. Yanis bowed his head slightly and walked backwards towards the exit. Alex never took his eyes off him, or his hand off his knife, until the ranger disappeared down the stairs. Now we're gonna have to contend with them too. War. Alex knew it was coming, and he wasn't sure he'd be able to work through it like the last one. Without Jack to pull him out of every fire, he was almost certain they were doomed to fail, but Alex would keep that to himself. This was his fight, and he would see it through until he no longer drew breath. Gates slipped away to the garage area and did a count of everything he had gathered for his excursion. Water, food, arrows, a pistol, ammo, fuel, and some parts he had scrapped from Alex's old hell chopper. It wasn't much, but it was light, and that would keep him supplied during his trip out into the wastes. With his pack full, he mounted his motorcycle and flicked open the kickstart. He pumped it twice with his leg, and the old engine came to life. It sputtered once or twice, but when Sam revved it, he was happy with how it sounded. Gates flicked the kickstand down and went to open the garage, but before he reached the controls, it was already rising. Beyond the climbing door was Janet. "Don't die on us out there," she said, puffing on the tail end of a cigarette. Gates gave her a half smile as he went to sit back down on the bike. He didn't say a word, and instead pulled the throttle back, racing off into the late New Purgatory night. The old maps were as accurate as they could be, but didn't account for so many old vehicle husks left to rust in the streets, or APCs that the Crusaders had likely destroyed. What struck Gates was the lack of people. He assumed they were out there, hiding in buildings, watching him. To Gates, it seemed the citizens of New Purgatory were a people trained to hide from soldiers, and that they were still working on adjusting to their free society. Free? This might well be another part of the wastes. Better to be cautious than dead. I know that better than anyone. He took in the buildings that still stood. Layla had explained that some were abandoned due to their lack of utility. No one wanted to walk up and down 30 flights of questionably stable stairs to get water. It was easier to stay close to the ground. Before Gates knew it, he ended up at what the map called the Holland Bridge. What he didn't know was that it was split in two, and apparently neither did Vixer. She told him to use the bridge because the old Holland tunnel system had been submerged before the war. Either the old government hadn't finished the bridge, or somebody blew up the center. "Gates to Velasco," he said over the comm he had been given. "Go ahead, Gates. Nobody told me the Holland Bridge was out." Alex laughed over the line. "Tried jumping it." "What?" Gates replied. "I did it once. Is the ramp still there?" Gates didn't see one, It had probably been pushed over the edge or scrapped by scavengers. No, you'll have to go the long way through Brooklyn then. It's the only other way outside the city from where you're at. Sam reached into his jacket and laid out the map on the handlebars. Vixer had marked red X's through the old Brooklyn borough. She told him it meant refugee camps and possible marine patrols. That works for me, Gates replied as he clicked off his comm and rolled the map back up. The longer the ride, the better. There was a haze over the Brooklyn Bridge that Sam couldn't describe. It was wrong, just like the military base in Nevada. Death had been there, but it lingered like a bad wound. There were rows upon rows of cars that nature was slowly reclaiming. Graffiti scrawled out warnings, calls for help, and pleading for refuge. Gates assumed that was from the pre-war, or perhaps right after. He imagined those that survived in the boroughs were still crippled by the quakes. He saw bodies, too. Some new, some nothing more than picked over bones covered in ragged clothing. The skeletons still upright in their driver's seats were the most troubling to Gates. If not for the nuclear weapons, he assumed they might have been shot by people trying to keep everyone off the bridge. He didn't know that for sure, but his mind had plenty of ideas. Could have been Morrison's start. Gates weaved his bike through the guard checkpoint and rode past the endless line of vehicles. He realized this bridge must have been a pilgrimage for those coming from the wastes. Those that came from the hard survival of post-nuclear living only had more death to look forward to here. It was one step closer to understanding the refugees. You could either fight to make a life for yourself in this city, or die alone in the unforgiving wastes. The borough of Brooklyn itself seemed intact apart from the occasional spots that tanks had shelled, or a plot of land reduced to refuse from the quakes. To Sam, it was like being back in Vegas, except colder, more pristine, and with less murderers out on the streets. Vegas, he said to himself, thinking back. Vegas, some time ago. California had been highways and wasteland, but Gates wondered if Nevada had any better luck. He was certain that sitting on a long beach littered with radiation and bodies wouldn't be useful, so he rode out east on a long sojourn into the desert, where there was more sand than asphalt. The trip had been the most action he had seen since leaving Oregon. Every couple of miles Gates saw vehicles, usually pickups reinforced with metal that came rushing at him with guns. He wondered if they thought him an easy target on only 2 wheels. He proved them wrong. He used old railway spikes he found in Reading to build caltrops that blew away the wheels of his would-be assailants. That never deterred them, though. They would chase him for prolonged periods of time, grinding the rims of their wheels into the scathing sands. Today had been one of those days. Gates knew they were close behind him. He could hear their war cries and the sound of automatic weapons firing behind him, and the roaring of old engines running on piss and petrol. He reached down for his quiver and grabbed an arrow, one specially made for this occasion. Sam spun around in his seat and let the bike's momentum carry him forward. As one of the trucks neared him, he pulled back on his bow and shot. The arrow coursed through the sky until it slammed into the broken glass windshield, causing a bright explosion. Gates had used a magnesium-tipped arrow to smash through the cracked glass. If the bright flash hadn't done its job, then the shards of glass would. Either way, the driver was likely blind. The driver veered off into a dune, while the others slowed to see their ally. Sam spun back around and continued riding. The raiders out here were deadly, but could never be mistaken for intelligent. As he rode for the outline of a broken city, he hoped he could avoid them for the rest of his trip. Most of Las Vegas wasn't covered in sand. The city itself was empty and destroyed. The grand hotels he heard about were nothing more than piles of refuse covered with shards of neon glass. The roads were packed with burnt-out vehicles he had to weave around, and, yet again, he found that humanity hadn't survived long enough to build a community. I can't be the only one left. Gates didn't mean the last man alive. He meant one of the last sane vestiges of humanity. The raiders were alive, but they weren't really people. Not anymore. They gave their humanity up eating the flesh of their fallen and danced around fire like tribals. Sam couldn't even get onto the strip. There was too much debris. He had hoped at least one building might have survived the war's blasts, but from the outskirts of the strip, the once shining city in the desert was unrecognizable. We did this to ourselves. We killed what we created, and we're still killing. He let out a sigh. The sun was getting close to setting behind the desert, and he was tired. He would have to find shelter for the night, but even that seemed hopeless. He reached into his pack for a canteen. When he went to drink from it, all he tasted was the stale, sandy air. Shit. Sam looked north. It was time to head back home with what little fuel he had left, but he wished he had more to show for it. The last bit of luck Vegas had to offer took pity on him. Only a few miles outside of Vegas, he came across a rundown gas station. Though rundown was a relative term compared to the buildings back in Vegas. The glass wasn't broken and the pumps still worked. He could even hear the humming of a generator. Gates parked his bike at the pump and set his pack down. For the first time in months, he reached down for the pistol at his waist. He had plenty of ammo to use it all the time, but he'd rather use it in a quick attack rather than wasting it on defense with raiders. This was all too convenient for him, so the gun came out in case of an ambush. Gates opened the door and the entrance bell rang. He saw nothing around but stock shelves, lights, and a sign at the counter that said, "Leave money here." Yeah, some good that'll do. He moved over to a case with bottled water and grabbed one, drinking all of it in a matter of seconds. Then he grabbed a few more, racing outside for his pack. As he started to fill his bag, he heard the rack of a shotgun behind his head. "Welcome to old Robbie's, boy." "This is your place, I take it?" Gates asked, lifting his hands from his bag. "Damn right. I don't take kindly to young men coming in and rummaging through my stuff. That water you got there is mine." Sam went to reach down and grab it, but the old hick pressed the gun into the back of his skull. You keep your filthy hands where I can see 'em, son. I don't want that water no more. You've tainted it with your filthy fucking hands." "All right, what do you want then?" "Reach into that bag, boy. Grab that tainted water you got." Gates did as he was told. "Now take a sip from it. A slow sip. Yes, just like that." Sam could hear some rustling behind him and couldn't feel the pressure of the gun behind his head anymore. "Yeah, keep drinking, boy. Nice and slow-like." Gates spun hard and grabbed the shotgun from the old hick's hands, and then butted him in the chest with it. The hick fell to the ground, his pants down around his ankles, and stared up at Sam, stunned. "Sick bastard, what the hell are you doing out here?" "Create my own slice of the old world, sir." Gates shook his head. "I should shoot you, but instead I'm going to hold on to this nice gun of yours." Sam ejected the rounds from the shotgun and stuffed them in his pocket, then strapped the gun itself around his back. He reached down for his pistol and aimed it at the old man. "Why don't you get raided?" "I'm the only supplier to the crazies out there. Any of them get wise, I shoot 'em, and then eat 'em." "And all this food, the sodas, the water?" "Old. Had a couple of trucks here before the blast. Keeps the shelves restocked. No one trades for chips and soda. They all want the fuel and the water. I'm sitting on a goddamn gold mine." "For a little while, at least. Ever get any civilized people?" "Raiders are more civilized than you, boy. At least they have the courtesy to trade some of their women folk from time to time." Gates placed his pistol back in its holster. The hick seemed off, but he wasn't a murderer. At least not to anyone Gates cared about. He didn't see a point to executing the man when he was providing a service. Sam reached down and helped him up. "I want to fill my bike, and I want a canister to carry more fuel. I also want a couple more bottles of water." "What makes you think I'd give you any of that?" Gates set his hand back down on the top of his pistol. The hick looked down and sighed. "Fine. I'll even throw in a bonus if it keeps you away from here, Wanderer. I got a traveler not too long ago from up the Groom. Didn't talk much, but had plenty of water to trade. You might want to check them." Sam smiled and pulled his pistol from its holster. The hick reared back in fear, but all Sam did was slide back 4 times, letting the bullets fall to the ground. "Keep the change." Present day. The East was different for Gates. There were too many places to hide and too many people alive. They all wanted to make it seem deserted, but only so they could catch you and capture you. He made it through Brooklyn with little fanfare. The other bridges took him out to a stretch of road Vixer called the Broken 95. That road was supposed to take him to the refugee camps marked on his map. The ride was calm. With all the dead vehicles pushed off to the sides of the road, he could take in the surroundings. He realized that Morrison's troops must have rolled through here once, looking for new conquests and manpower. That was apparent by some of the military equipment left so obviously out in the open, with the same black and gray color scheme. Most of it was jeeps with the front ends blown off. or APCs that had lost a tread and were abandoned, empty clips to rifles that hadn't yet been scavenged, or left behind skeletons draped in fatigues. Their mission was like what Gates was doing now, alone. He was relieved that he was away from the tall buildings and the copious amounts of people, though. Gates hated crowds. Traveling alone suited him. It wasn't that he minded Alex and Layla, but even their presence made him feel exposed. Trying to avoid people for the better part of 20 years had made him paranoid around others. Sam slowed his bike when the sun went down. He found shelter in an old rest stop. It looked abandoned, so he moved his bike under the building's awning and set up a tarp to cover it. This would keep him for the night. There wasn't much for him to keep his hands busy with. He opened his bag and he sat against the wall and pulled out an old protein bar, a bottle of water, and a pipe. It seemed Ghana had stayed popular out east as it was out west. For that he was thankful. He took a pull from the pipe and laid his head back, looking up at the stars and wondering where this new future in the east would take him. Vale found himself in the thick of the remnant camp. The clothes Vixer had given him made him blend in well with the rest of the Marines at the camp, but as he walked around and looked at the living conditions, he had a tough time believing they were surviving as well as the refugees. For the most part, the camp was clean. Fires burned, food was being cooked, but all the soldiers had dark circles around their eyes. They didn't move like soldiers, more like slaves who had toiled all day long. Others were physically maimed, some were missing fingers, ears, or scarred across their eyes. Janet's been doing a better job than she thought. That explained the willingness of the Marines that had converted at Vixer's behest. The people here were slowly dying out. If they stayed, it was either out of pride or stubbornness. Both were stupid, yet Vale knew the same could have been said of the refugees while Morrison was in power. It would have been easy to join the Marines while they had control. 3 hot meals a day and no fear of being hunted down might have been appealing to some, but for those with ideals of freedom, it would never be enough. Vale stopped outside of a medical tent and looked up at the wounded. He realized then why there were so many cut up and scarred people walking around. There wasn't enough room to treat people. At least 2 Marines were bleeding so profusely Vale thought they wouldn't last an hour. One man had lost a leg, another lost an arm, but his wounds were so bad on the other that Vale wondered if the medics were thinking of lobbing that one off too. Tyrese hated that this was their reality. It was true, they were his enemy, but they were still people. They still had lives that could have been better served making the world better. It made him feel like nothing had changed with the death of Morrison, except for the dividing line between the conquerors and the conquered. It was an assault on hope. He questioned if that line would ever cease, or if there were only those in power and those that were not. "Make it in, Vale." That was Vixer, radioing him over the comm. "Copy that," Tyrese replied. "There should be a broken building. Looks like the second floor collapsed into the first. That's your way to the major." Vale clicked his comm as a group of Marines passed him, letting Vixer know he understood, and then made his way towards the large bonfire in the center of the camp. Men and women were talking and eating around it while Tyrese looked through the thick smoke for his building. That's when he felt an arm on his shoulder. He spun around quick, trying to suppress the nervousness in his stomach. "Get yourself something to eat, Marine. You're looking too skinny," the man said as he patted Tyrese on the shoulder again before he walked off. The soldier smelled of liquor and smoke from the fire, but Tyrese was relieved to see him heading away. He took a deep breath and continued his hunt for the major. The camp was vast, despite the small number of soldiers that were awake and on display. To Vale, it was just another sign of their diminishing numbers. He wondered how many of the remnant there had been to start, even before Vixer had left. Finally, Vale managed to find the building he was looking for. 2 guards stood watch out front. Without any actual rank or knowledge of military lingo, he wasn't sure he could brazen by them. Instead, he looked for other ways inside. He could see rubble that was packed together where the second floor had collapsed into the first. He wondered if he could climb it to the second level and then find a way downstairs. "Vixer, any tips on getting in?" Vale asked over the comm. "I'd recommend the front door." "Without the Marines trying to kill me?" "You could use an old code, sneak in under the guise of a traitor from my platoon. Of course, if they find out you're lying, they'll tie your legs up to 2 different jeeps and drive until one part of you is Tyrese and the other part is Vale." Tyrese shook his head and then clicked his comm. He reached into his coat pocket and found the old passcode Keeley had written down for him. Then he checked his pistol. He wasn't about to be ritually executed if the Marines decided they didn't believe him. Not a great plan, but better than sneaking around in the rubble. State your name, Marine, one of the guards said as Vale approached the doorway. Sergeant Cal Smith, I-07. I have a report for the Major about Captain Vixer, Vale answered. Everyone in I-07 is a traitor, Sergeant. That would include you, the guard replied, bringing his rifle up. Not all of us. Captain had most of us fooled. We had no idea she was breaking away. The ones who were against her were shot or taken prisoner for labor camps. It's all in my report, sir. The guard looked over at his colleague, who shrugged. He turned his head back to Vale and eyed him up. You just got here, then? Tyrese could feel the nervousness creeping up from his stomach to his throat. Yeah, I've been roaming for a few days. They sent teams after me. I'm one of the few prisoners that made it out. I saw you come in, the other guard said. You didn't even grab a bite first. You must be hungry if you've been out in the waste for that long. With what I have to report, sir, the food can wait, Vale replied, fighting the nerves in his words. Both guards paused for a moment to ponder that, and then pushed the door behind them open, giving Vale a nod. Welcome back, Marine. We're happy you made it out alive. Vale nodded back and then entered the makeshift barracks. Once he was inside and the doors had closed behind him, he felt relieved. The building was bare and covered in the same gray dust that spilled over everything in New Purgatory. There were cave-ins and collapses in most of the rooms and debris strewn throughout the halls. Vale wondered why the Major thought a building that could topple over at any time was a decent spot to put his office. He let those thoughts go as he tried to fit in with the other soldiers and their quick pace around the building. Still, he had trouble not being curious. It was his nature. He was surrounded by men and women who had lived in pristine barracks and towers, but now were struggling as much as the Crusaders and the people of the city had. He almost questioned the resolve of Vixer. Vale neared the Major's office with 2 Marines standing guard out front. He doubted antiquated codes and his nervous tongue would get him past the 2 steeled men that blocked his path. Instead, he strode past them and looked at the adjoining room. It was an empty office. Several weapons were strewn about a desk unprofessionally. The safeties were off, clips were loaded in, and they were all covered in grease and dirt. Tyrese closed the door behind him and decided to search around. He peeked inside the metal desk that sat in the center of the room, but only found papers, old photos, and some files. Most of it was an organizational mess, like it had been moved in a hurry. Vale was about to give up when he decided to look down in the locked file drawer at the foot of the desk. He grabbed a flathead screwdriver from inside his coat and cracked the lock, but stopped short of opening the drawer all the way when the faint gleam of a red light caught his eye. Vale peered closer into the crack he had opened. The red light illuminated a string as thin as a fishing line. That's when he realized the line wasn't there to keep the drawer closed, nor was the light there to aid anyone's vision. He placed the screwdriver back in his pocket and instead reached for a pair of scissors on the desk above him. He snipped the string and checked around the drawer for any others. He could see none. Well, shit. Vale took a deep breath and pulled the drawer open. Nothing happened. There were some blank pages that hid what could have killed a less observant man. A well-placed trip mine, its red light dead now that the string had been cut. What was this trying to protect? Tyrese lifted the mine from the drawer and placed it on top of the desk, then began searching through the papers it had been sitting on top of. They didn't seem important enough to warrant such fatal protection. Most of the pages were old requisition forms, ammunition audits, and other bullshit. He was about to give up his search until he found several pages held together by a paper clip. He began reading through them and then realized that this information was what the owner of the desk was trying to protect. He looked up and over the desk, making sure no one was checking in on him, then sat back down on the floor and put a hand up to the comm in his ear. Vixer, what the hell is Operation Sanguine Rill? The captain did not reply. Tyrese wasn't feeling as patient with her as he had a few days ago while he read through each page in detail. And why the hell is your name one of the few signed at the bottom of the page? When Gates woke up, the sun was just starting to rise at the horizon, which he could hardly see through the fog. He picked himself up and gathered his things before mounting up on his bike again. It wasn't long before he reached the first settlement outpost marked on his map. From a distance, he could see makeshift battlements above steel scavenged from old billboards and vehicles. There were spikes that were pointed outward to ward off potential invaders, and heads placed at the end of them. Gates knew from experience that most settlements, or raider outposts, had 2 guards posted if only to watch out for raiding parties or traders. But as he rode closer, the lack of anyone on the battlements and the smell of smoke and char began to worry him. He came to a halt just in front of the settlement's main entrance, kicked the stand to his bike down, and lifted a leg over the bike itself. He grabbed his bow and slung it across his back. There were no ladders up the battlements, and the entrance had no lever to open it from the outside. Sam looked for a way up, finding handholds on broken cars and old sheared metal plating. After a few moments of climbing and trying not to cut his hands on rusted pieces of metal, he made it to the top, and what he had suspected was clear. The center of the gray place was a pit of smoldering corpses. He didn't look closely at them. The smell triggered a gag reflex that he fought back. Gates didn't need the image of burnt women and children to haunt the last innocent vestiges of his brain. He hopped down from the battlements and into the camp, searching around for anyone who might have survived this sacking. Failing that, he hoped he could find the bodies that hadn't been charred to give him a clue as to who might have attacked this place. There were tents spread out around the small encampment. Gates wandered away from the pits towards one of the larger ones. He covered his nose with his jacket to repel the smell of burnt hair and bodily fluids. Inside the tent, he found only one body, a woman, her clothes removed. There were no bullet wounds, and with so many dead, he doubted the people here were supposed to be captured and used for labor. Gates tried to stop thinking about what this woman's fate might have been, but judging by the harsh bruises on her neck and lack of clothing, it was clear. "Gates, are you there?" It was Alex's voice calling over the comm. "You were expecting someone else?" "We have some news." "Yeah, so do I. I'm standing over 40 or 50 raped and burning bodies. I get the feeling we've been played, Alex. This is just the first settlement I've been to, but the fog I thought I saw this morning, it's smoke, and I can see it rising in several spots in the distance." "I know," Alex replied. "The remnant beat you there." "Why do I feel like I might need more than just a bow and a handgun?" Vale found some documents about the remnant. They're a step ahead of us. They knew we were looking for more people and started hunting down the settlements out in the wastes. The plan was scorched earth. Leave no one alive, take no one alive. A clash of metal on metal cut Alex off. The front gate collapsed to the ground, revealing an APC and several Marines around it. Sam ran for one of the tents, ducking from their view. "Why in the hell would they come back?" "Have to go, Alex. Your remnant friends are here." Gates clicked his comm off and watched from the tent as the APC moved away and the Marines backed a truck up to the pile. He shook his head as one of the Marines opened the back hatch. "More fucking bodies. They're using this place to burn them." That confirmed what Gates already knew. Anybody he was trying to recruit out here was probably already dead. He watched one of the soldiers unceremoniously push the bodies out the truck bed with a shovel. His odds were bad. He didn't have the advantage of elevation, and the APC had a gun turret. Never mind, he was outnumbered by roughly 4 Marines and however many more there were inside the APC. The only option he had was to wait and hope they wouldn't explore the tents again. The smoke wafted in his tent as the bodies were added to the pile. The Marines' gas poured over them and ignited the fire once more. Finally, he could take no more. Gates knew he should wait, but between the smell, the brutality, and his anger, he had been pulled back to that same musty Las Vegas air. He reached down to his quiver for an arrow, drew it back, and then released it at the Marine with the shovel. The man went down in a bright flash that only magnesium could create and stumbled off the back of the truck into the fire. The Marines rushed to save their fallen friend, while Sam made a run for the battlements. He climbed fast, just as the Marines caught him at the top. In quick succession, he fired off 3 arrows into the ground forces. 2 hit their marks too low. The Marines returned machine gun fire, even as they fell to the ground. The APC began to get in on the action, pounding the sheet metal Gates had used as cover. He was running out of tricks. He waited for a break in their firing, then ran and jumped over the battlements, hoping his jacket wouldn't get caught on a spike. He hit the ground with a roll and made for his bike, kicked it over and rode for the highway. He could hear the rumbling of the APC behind him, the whirling of the chain gun firing to his rear. So much for hoping they wouldn't chase me. The bullets sprayed near him. Hope drifted away into the thick smoke of dead refugees. Gates rode for the inner city, or what was left of it. He bobbed and weaved between husks of cars the APC slammed into. He gave a glance back and saw that the Marine transport was slowed with each wreck it had to push. He kept on his path, and eventually he was out of range of the APC's turret. He pinned the throttle back, going deeper into the city and further away from the remnant. Tyrese's mission felt like it had dropped on the back burner. He had left Vixer's office and found himself sitting on a bench with a tray of food in the remnant camp. He was still looking over the documents he found, like both he and the top secret papers belonged there. Vale had already relayed the pertinent information to Alex. Vixer was likely being interrogated, and that made Vale question his haste to trust in her, and how this small remnant knew so much about New Purgatory's defenses. He had seen the maps that Vixer gave to Gates. They were the same ones in the battle plan. Vale hoped that Vixer was trying to give them an edge, but remembered her lack of being forthcoming about the remnant's numbers. It could have all been a well-set trap, and he might not have expected any of it with his willingness to believe people at their word. He finished the pasta and bread he was eating and stuffed the documents into one of his pockets, and then he made back for the ruined building, walking past the Marines he had feared earlier. After he reached Vixer's office again, he began digging around her cabinet until he found the trip mine again. It had been the guardian of the gold he had found, and now it would be the tool he used to kill the Major. Tyrese pressed his ear up to the wall. Inside, he could hear Major Vera barking orders to his subordinates. He yelled about patrols and loss of life in the outskirts of the city. Vale had heard enough. He placed the mine on the wall, and then walked over to the door. Vale raised his sidearm and aimed at the mine, then fired. The explosion rocked the room, knocking Vale back into the hallway. He had to fight to retain his footing as wall plaster came down around him. There were Marines running in every direction with their weapons in hand. One called out that they were being shelled. Another yelled out to report to the battlements. Vale walked towards Major Vera's office as if nothing had happened. Inside, he saw blood-splattered walls created by the Major and the two poor bastards that had been listening to his incessant yelling. Vale smiled to himself, and then turned around and began to run like so many of the other Marines, and he didn't stop until he was once again deep in the bowels of New Purgatory. Keely Vixer was trying to be cautious with her words as well as her hand movements. She was sitting in a chair near the rooms of the Crusaders. Janet was pacing around the doorway with her rifle, and Alex looked like he was ready to pounce on top of her and beat her to death with his fists or stab her in the throat with his blade. They had been sitting there for more than a half hour in silence. Alex just stared at her while Keely tried to find something, anything else in the room to focus on. A crack in the ceiling, a speck of dirt on the table, the sound of water running through the pipes behind the walls. It wasn't until 43 minutes of silence passed that Alex began to speak. Vixer would know. She had counted. "Why didn't you say anything?" Alex asked. Vixer was wondering why he hadn't disarmed her when he called her to the apartments. The captain wasn't surprised at this meeting Alex had called. She had heard Vale's calm but didn't bother to respond. Keely thought Alex might have been trying to prove a point by not taking her gun, but she didn't know what that point was. "It was before I broke away. In the weeks before your attack, Morrison had planned on restarting Operation Blood Boil under a new name, but he never had the chance. Major Vera decided to draft the plans himself. A systematic slaughter of the civilians in and outside the city to prevent your team from growing and developing a support system. Operation Sanguine Rill, the Bloody River." "The only river flowing is the one out of his office," Vale said over the comm, cutting into their conversation. "Good," Vixer replied. "I hated that bastard." "Why wait to tell us, Keely? Chances are good that Gates is dead. You had to know Tyrese would find those documents," Janet asked. "I hoped we could beat him there, but I was wrong. The plan was cagey at best, but Gates wanted to do it. I get the feeling he wanted to prove that I could be trusted if I gave the plans to him, an outsider. But if I had told you about the Remnant's plans, you would never have sent him, and we wouldn't know if the people out there were alive or dead." Vixer shook her head and looked towards Janet, who was looking at Alex. She was reading the frustration on his face. The captain turned her head back over to Alex. He gave her the same look a man or woman got when they have been lied to one too many times. Vixer wondered if he was disappointed in her, or that he had fallen for another lie. Alex let out a sigh. "I had hoped that when I returned I'd be able to keep everyone's trust through my name and my deeds alone. I guess I was foolish for thinking that. Janet, the gun." He pointed to the pistol at her waist. Janet pulled it from her holster, ejected the clip, and tossed the gun at him. Alex moved to the chair next to Keeley. She didn't understand what the hell was going on. Alex placed the blackened, carbon-scarred gun on the table in front of her. She said nothing. The perplexed look on her face was all she could muster. Trust, Alex started. Trust is the deadliest weapon I have, Keeley. Janet mentioned that you asked how we took down Morrison with so few resources. It was trust. That's why a small team took down the tower and stopped every advance taken against us. Trust in each other, trust in ourselves, and trust in our abilities. Before this bar, before all the weaponry, the people, and the city, that's all we had. Why the gun, then? Vixer asked. It belonged to a man who had the ability to do all those things I just said, and he died because of it. Not because of his trust in me, not because he was my friend, but because he believed. He sacrificed himself for me, for the team. I grew up on these streets with him. We witnessed all the loss people went through and the ruthlessness of John Morrison. I lost him in a trap that was set for us. A lifetime of memories, hardship, and shared experience were lost in the space of 1 hour. If I could have traded places with him, I would have. I trusted him with my life, and he gave his to save mine. He trusted me to get us to our goal, whether he would live to see it or not. His name was Elias, and he believed even when everyone else wouldn't. Now all I have left of him is this damn pistol and a couple of journal entries to remind me of him. So you see why I need everything you are, everything you know. I've been betrayed and jerked around too much to continue any other way. You said you didn't bait us into this, and I believe you, because I know how important that trust is. But if you break that trust, Keeley, I'll wrap my hands around your throat and I won't let go until I see blood and regret pouring from your eyes. Alex reached for Elias's pistol and gripped it. Vixer reached a hand out and grasped the back of Alex's hands. He looked up at her. The captain could see that he was fighting emotion in his eyes. That expression told Keeley all she needed to know about Alexander Velasco, his vision, and the heart he had for his people. It will never happen again. I swear, she said as she let go of his hand. Alex tossed the pistol back towards Janet. Good, Alex replied. Now let's go save Gates. Sam Gates was held up in an old pre-war garage that survived the blast, but his body didn't feel right, like his heart was pounding out of his chest. Between that and the smell of bodies he couldn't seem to get out of his nostrils, he felt sick. He fought the nausea by smoking from his pipe and distracting himself by keeping a lookout for the APC on the roof. It was doubtful that they would chase him this far, but he had met raiders that were hell-bent on chasing prey. Marines were almost obligated to do the same. He had 2 mag arrows left. Everything else was standard shit that wouldn't pierce an old world vehicle. It made Gates consider the pistol he had been supplied, but he thought better of it. Things could always get worse. This isn't the time. Sam decided to instead focus his energy on locking down the garage. He barricaded the only door with a rusted toolbox and pulled down the metal shutters where cars would enter and leave for service. It was as good a shelter as any. Most of the tools here had been stolen, but he had his own. It was the cover that mattered the most. Gates lit a fire using an old phone book and some tires, then opened the hatch to the roof for ventilation. He knew that would give him away, but it was either that or die from smoke inhalation. For the first time in several weeks, he felt at peace. He was alone in his element, surviving on what the old world had left behind. Sam didn't have the weight of others standing on his shoulders, and he didn't have to rely on anyone else. There was comfort in that. He had been on his own for far too long to want to get used to living in a community like a normal person. What appeal is there? Sure, I'm being hunted. Sure, I'm being chased down by armed members of a militant army, but I'm alive. My stomach's full, and I'm warm. The hell else does a man need? Gates knew he'd still be in a basement in Nevada if not for Alex and Layla. That was a situation he couldn't get out of alone. It was a frightening thought that he might have to trust and rely on other people again, especially those that were idealists like Alexander Velasco. Gates thought he was chasing a dream that couldn't exist. Society, the kind Gates had grew up in, was dead. Nothing, not clinging governments, not secret technologies, not even the beating hearts of revolutionaries could change that. Still, it's hard not to want to believe in Alex. What he and his friends have set up here is the closest to organized life I've seen since before the war. Not sure I could just pass that up and become a drifter again. Gates' desire to abstain from human contact wouldn't get in the way of his interest in New Purgatory. That reminded him that he had left his comm switched off. He brought a hand up to his ear and clicked it back on. "Gates, come in." It was Layla's voice. "Yeah, I'm still alive. Don't carve a headstone for me just yet." "You had us worried there, Sam. We're coming for you in a bird," Alex cut in. "Where the hell are you?" "Held up in some shithole garage. Followed the trail of smoke." "Copy that." With that, they left him alone. If Gates could give one positive about Alex, apart from the man giving up a finger for his life, it was that he understood the people he met and their differences. There was no need for lengthy conversation or bullshit. Alex and his team were on their way, and that's all Gates needed to hear. The rattling on the garage door dropped all pretenses of him being alone. He decided to climb up through the roof. Once he was there, he crawled along it, careful to not reveal himself. The people below hadn't seen him. Gates noted that they didn't look like soldiers. They weren't wearing the black and gray patterns of Morrison's remnant. It was an assorted mix of leather and cloth. Tribals. Gates rose with his bow aimed down and drawn back at the closest tribal. The pair, a man and a woman, looked up at him. "Can I help you?" Gates called out. The pair looked at each other. "Where you from, stranger?" the male asked in a strange accent Gates had not heard before. "Out west. You?" "Here and there. Mostly south of places. What you cooking in there?" "Tires." Gates didn't let loose of his bowstrings. He could see it was making the woman nervous, and he was fine with that. "Y'all got a community down here?"
"Don't know anymore," the woman answered. "Soldier boys been coming through, killing, raping. We were scouts looking out for this and that. Just missed 'em hitting our home."
"You might want to scout elsewhere. Say New Purgatory. The Marines are about, and I'm the only one here for the night. You want shelter, you can take it tomorrow after I've left." The two nodded to Gates, and then trod off into the haze of fog and smoke. Sam finally let loose on his bowstrings and strapped the bow around his torso again. He let out a long sigh and stayed on the roof until the tribals were no longer in sight. He climbed back down into his garage and rummaged around his bag for a piece of dried meat. As he took a bite into it, he could feel the foulness seeping onto his taste buds. He kept chewing and chewing, trying to ignore the nasty flavor, and then reached for the bag it was in. Rat. Yeah, Gates thought that getting back to civilization might not be the worst decision after all. Alex tapped his foot against the metal of the Hellchopper's hold. Layla piloted, and he was in close quarters with Vixer. Janet had stayed back to regroup with Vale. The silence between both Alex and Vixer was still tense, and Alex didn't want to attempt to break that silence with some lighthearted conversation. It was too early for that. He had worked with difficult people before, and he knew that trust and respect would come on its own. Vixer was a different animal, though. She had been an ally of his old enemy. Still, Alex had hope that there would be a breakthrough, or, failing that, one of them would end up dead. At this point, either solution suited him.
10 minutes out, Alex. You might want to get on the comm. I can't tell what's fog and what's smoke,"
Layla said. Alex pressed a hand up to his ear. "You got your comm on, Gates?"
"Yeah, Alex, are you flying in?"
"That's right. Won't be able to use smoke signals to find you, though." The only reply Alex heard from Gates' end of the comm was gunshots that rang out loud. "Gates? Gates!" Alex yelled. There was no reply.
"Layla? I heard, Alex. I'm bringing the bird down."
"Keep an eye out for flashes. That might be the only way to find out where he is." Vixer nodded at Alex as Gates' comms went dead after the gunfire. They were all blind. "So much for leaving me alone. Must be the tribals." Bullets were crashing against the steel of the garage that made a horrible echo that rang in Gates' ears, but the last thing he wanted to do was nursemaid Alex into the garage. The sound of another barrage of bullets pulled Sam from his own thoughts. If the Marines were out here listening, that sound would be all they needed to find his location. Gates looked around for anything he could find to help against the pair outside his door. His eyes scanned around the old garage until he found an old cabinet. Sam opened them up, and inside of it was an item better than gold. Oil pans. He grabbed the closest one and measured it by shaking it up and down. He assumed it had to be half full, and then started draining it by the steel doors, and then led a trail of black oil towards the bonfire he had made. Gates grabbed 2 more pans and then ran for a door deeper in the building. Most of the place was torn apart, but he found a window to crawl out of and made back for the street. He watched the 2 scouts discharge their weapons into the doors continuously. Sam smiled to himself as he clicked the comm back on. "I've got a better signal for you, Alex." "Oh yeah? What's that?" Fire exploded from the garage and blew the steel doors off. They slammed into the scouts, and the fire began incinerating whatever was left. Gates knew he had likely set off a beacon for whoever the hell else was in the city, but he didn't care. "Holy shit!" Alex yelled out over the comm. "I'm across the street now, but it looks like our remnant friends saw that blast too." Sam cut back in. Gates could hardly hear the roaring engines of the hell chopper as it came down, but he could see the fog lights of several APCs slamming through old cars and debris. Sam reached for his last mag arrow and aimed it high in the air, letting it fly. The arrow rocketed up high. In those few moments, nothing else mattered but the arrow's trajectory and how Gates had fired it. He watched it all the way until it began its descent, and then plunged in front of the first APC. The bright explosion forced its driver to swerve hard right. The APC couldn't handle the turn and rolled onto its side into a barricade. The APC behind it slammed into its colleague, making it halt as the hell chopper touched down beside Gates. Alex and Vixer came running down the rear ramp, their rifles up and ready to fire. But Gates was putting his bow back over his body, wearing it like a bandolier. "You did that with your bow?" Vixer asked, looking off in the distance at the overturned APC. "That and a little luck, and a healthy amount of magnesium," Gates replied. "Hate to break this up, but we've got more APCs bearing down," Layla yelled. The trio packed back in the hell chopper, and Layla brought the bird back into the air. The engines roared as the hell chopper screamed eastward in the night, and for a moment, just a small moment, Gates was able to forget that he had left his motorcycle back in the garage. "Shit, I grabbed my pack, but I left the bike." It was being turned into ash now. He knew it. All the work he had put into keeping it running, all the parts he had salvaged over the years, all gone in one early morning, or whatever the hell time it was. Sam let out a sigh as he looked at the dimming fire out in the distance. He wanted to believe he would get to ride a motorcycle again, but the chances of that were slim. He sat back on the ramp as the bird flew away, never taking his eyes off the fire. Alex decided to wait the rest of the night to try and decipher what the hell had happened over the course of one day and one hellish evening. When he woke up, though, the problems were still there, and as he sat in his chair, he tried to reestablish all the events in his head. In less than an evening, they had killed the Remnant's leader, discovered a plot to wipe out refugees, nearly outed Vixer as a traitor, and then spent much of the early morning trying to find and save Gates from the trap he had walked into. None of this added any more soldiers to the cause of protecting New Purgatory, or at least not yet. Alex was starting to understand why the scars on Janet's face looked more weathered than the last time the two had met. The rest of the table was empty. He was staring at the bloody scar on the map and table where Mikhail's blade had once been. Alex's new journal wasn't too far away from it. There was nothing he wanted to record just now. How could he? His mind could barely keep up with the events that had just transpired. Tyrese Vale was the first to join. The man looked well rested for someone who had run roughly 20 miles in a night. It wasn't hard to tell that Vale was in decent shape. He wore tank tops and tight jeans most days that complemented his toned structure. Alex had also noted that Vale didn't bother to dress any warmer, apart from a coat when the weather was cold. Not that it mattered. Alex himself preferred shirts with no sleeves to anything else that might have prevented range of motion. Vale greeted Alex with a nod and sat down. He set a sketchbook down and started outlining whatever he was working on. To Alex, Vale carried a light-hearted nature, but he didn't know him well enough to determine whether that was born of foolishness or idealism. We'll see how he holds up if someone dies. It's not so easy keeping the mask on then. Alex hated thinking like that. It almost seemed like he wanted someone they knew to die just to wipe the smile off Vale's face, but he didn't want that. They were just two different people. Alex had to take the world and everyone around him seriously, sometimes to a fault. He let out a sigh and wondered what Tyrese was working on. Alex hated it when people asked him what he was writing in his journal, though, so he decided to show Vale the amount of respect he hoped he would get and didn't ask. Vixer came in next. Her old marine fatigues were worn but immaculately clean and pressed. Alex knew she wasn't doing that to impress anyone here. Vixer's attitude was all he needed to confirm that. More than likely, it was out of old habit, a habit she couldn't let go of. She wasn't just a Marine, her parents were old world military, and those traditions were ingrained in her mind. He watched as Vixer placed a hand on Tyrese's shoulder as she sat down beside him, then attempted a smile that Alex thought looked more like someone trying to cheer up a widow, rather than a good morning, how are you kind of smile. Yeah, Vixer might have had intelligence and killer instinct, but when it came to charisma or empathy, it had been replaced by a steeled conviction to duty. Janet walked out of her room next. She was a stark contrast to Vixer. Scarred but complimenting of her features, she still wore the same long black strands she had when they first met. Alex always wondered how they never got in the way of her aim. It must have been quite a sight for the Marines, a green-eyed merc wiping them out one trigger pull at a time. She had on her old fatigues that had holes everywhere, and a sleeveless muscle shirt, like Alex's, and a black leather bomber jacket with her father's old accolade stitched on the front, sunglasses hanging out of her pocket. In that moment, Alex saw the beauty Elias had originally been entranced with. But there was more to her than that. Her nature, how similar she had been to all of them. But he knew she had changed, softened. Elias had done that, either in life or death. Her new demeanor had proved that. Rough around the edges as she had a goal fulfilled and a new purpose. There was a kindness that existed where before there was rage. Janet had lived a hard life that was growing more complicated by the day. The aging of the scar that ran from the left side of her forehead down past her eye and ended at her jawline was evidence of that. It made him wonder if she thought the exact same thing when she looked at him. It had been a while since Alex had looked in a mirror. He knew Janet would phrase it in a more eloquent way. "You look like shit, boss." That made him smile. Janet returned his smile as she took a seat to the left of the table. Layla came out a moment later. She hadn't aged much at all compared to when Alex had first met her. She was still the enamoring English transplant Alex had found that was trapped by Morrison's soldiers. But Layla was no damsel. She had killed more of Morrison's Marines the day they met than he and Elias combined. She had the misfortune of being trapped in a place she thought was safe. For better or worse, Layla had chosen to stay with him. Alex wasn't sure how he had gotten so lucky. Amidst the death and the pain, she never faltered. That only made his admiration for her grow, but he hoped she wasn't just hiding that pain where he couldn't see it. Not like he did with her. Layla sat down to the right of the head of the table. She reached a hand to one of Alex's that was extended over the table and gripped it. Alex gave her a smile and looked into her blue eyes, and then turned his hand over and gripped back. Gates was the last to sit down. When he made his way from his room, he looked weathered and half dead, like a man who'd been out in a sandstorm too long while the sun beat down on his head. Alex could see that he'd donned fresh clothes and had showered, but even the best clothes and soap couldn't wash away the grit that was as natural as a tan for a survivor. That brand of grit was earned from fighting alone for too long, struggling for food, staying away from social graces, and killing anyone who stood in your way. Alex understood that to a point, but he doubted he would ever attain the same wealth of knowledge Gates had. Alex knew he had learned his own lessons, though. He had survived war. Gates survived post-war. That was the hell Alex vacationed to after Morrison was dead. Still, Alex saw Gates' uses. Survival was the skill of scouts, assassins, and bounty hunters. He had almost lost himself in thought when he realized the members of his team were staring at him, waiting for him to say anything. He pulled his hand away from Layla's grasp and put it in his jacket for a lighter and a cigarette. He was content to fry his lungs with the same old tobacco Elias had used. He plucked a cigarette into his mouth and used the burner to roast the tip. Alex inhaled, breathing the smoke and fire in deep, holding it down for a moment and exhaling the smoky flavor into the air. "Well, this isn't where I figured we would be today, but nothing ever seems to go the way we plan or the way we hope. Though I think we've got the issues surrounding us sorted out. I was told that more of the remnant troops arrived this morning. That's more soldiers than we had a day ago, and for what it's worth, we have a semblance of a standing army. Everyone sitting around this table knows that's not enough. With this new threat, we need assurance that New Purgatory can defend itself from small raids to massive attacks. We're not going to be around forever, so we need to be sure this place can sustain itself should the worst happen. Alex took a long drag off his smoke and looked in the eyes of each person sitting around the table. To any of us. He received a few nods from Janet and Vale. Everyone else looked like they were trying to pretend they didn't hear him. Layla was looking at her fingernails. Keeley had begun to smoke her own cigarette, and Gates was chewing on jerky. Jack Newsom knew his plan wouldn't come without resistance. Everything I thought was rambling turned out to be worries, and yet another plan to keep the place we fought for whole. By now we know that Jack had a couple allies in places from before his war against Morrison, but the old man ran out of time. Maeve Maris in Old Cairo was at the top of the list he never got to. Apart from Jerusalem, Cairo is the only place near the Middle East that has an organized army. I want to check that out, see what kind of connection the Maeve had with Jack, and try to convince her that her country has a future in world government. Russia would be next. An old friend of ours, Mikhail Koslov, is likely out there. He's an old soldier and more. We need him in his country, or whatever is left of it. As they still have a vote on the council, we're going to need that if we want New Purgatory to be seen as legitimate. Beruger is too smart for us to keep waging wars in the shadows. He'll turn every other nation against us unless we can do it to him first. We're not going to beat him with blood. We'll have to attack his character. That's going to make where we go after Russia even harder. China. The people there, the escaped Japanese slaves, I owe a debt to them. I also owe a debt to Talia and her father. It's another suicide mission. Maybe worse than what we dealt with before. But if we succeed, we gain another army and another new seat on the council. When it's all done, we come back here, send our own ambassador to Jerusalem, bring out the truth of what Berlin has been doing, their deal with Morrison. We expose it all and force them to be honest. It's our best play. After that, we're either firmly entrenched in the council, or we'll have a bigger fight. If we do get support from the council, though, Beruger will have to think twice before trying an invasion. The other members won't stand for it. Alex took a breath of fresh air as he ashed his cigarette out on the table. Once again, he looked around the oak table at his team. Any objections? Janet raised a hand, and Alex extended his own out to her. I like everything I'm hearing, boss, but there's one issue. I'm not going to be able to leave and come with you. Someone needs to stay here and keep this city going. I won't trust that to a few soldiers that turned. Janet shifted her gaze over to Keeley. I'm sorry, Captain. I just can't. I gotta stay. Alex gave Janet a nod. What about Talia? Janet brought a palm up to her forehead and let out a long sigh. I've got no other solution, Alex. I could go with you, but if we came back and all we fought for is gone, then we wasted our time. I won't let that happen. Not after all the work that's been done while you were gone. Then we'll make it work, Alex said. For everyone else, I know there's a lot of shit I'm throwing out there. If you want out, then now's your chance. But there's history to be made here, and a home, if you'll have it. Tyrese nodded at Alex. The man had been helping Janet before the two even met. He was loyal, and he wanted to be a Crusader, though they were dead. Alex was going to make him and everyone else who stayed the next best thing. Gates shrugged from the other end of the table. I'm here. You saved my life. Twice now, in fact. Whatever this is can't be any worse than whatever's out there in the wastes. I'm all for finding out what your future holds. Vixer was the only new member who hadn't spoken. There were 5 sets of eyes on her. Alex tried to put himself in her position. She was sitting at a table where almost no one trusted her, and he knew damn well she didn't trust anyone here. But he had hope that after talking to her, she might take the leap. Being a leader was not what I was born to do, Vixer started. I've always taken orders at face value and accomplished them. I'm a soldier. I prefer to fight. But I've done what I had to keep some of the remnants safe. I never thought it would lead me to the people who brought us down, but this is where we're at. That doesn't do much to foster any faith amongst you, but I'm going to do whatever I can to change that with my blood, or even my life if I must. I made a promise to my soldiers that they wouldn't have to struggle for their lives anymore. I intend to keep that promise. I am with you. All of you. Everyone around the table nodded. Alex finally relaxed back in his chair. Good. We're going to get this place sorted out. I know we will. For now, though, I want you all to go out, get a drink, and we'll load up the bird later tonight. First stop, Old Cairo, to meet this Maeve of Maris. Alex sipped on an old ale in Alonso's garage. It was the only place he could hide from his team for a little while. 6 months ago, he'd be down in the bar with the rest of them, or he could have locked the door to his room. He didn't want to avoid his team, but he felt it was for the best as they got to know each other and gathered their gear. He had hoped there would be a vehicle to work on, or at least admire. Instead, he was met with something covered by an old tan tarp. Alex recognized the profile, but thought better than to violate Janet's privacy. It turned out he didn't have to. I figured you'd be down here, Janet said as she walked down from the cement stairs leading up to the club. Alex saw that she had a beer in her hands, most of it drained. How'd you guess? Alex asked. It was either up here or with Blondie up in your room, and Blondie's in the bar writing in your journal. This place brings back memories for you, doesn't it? Alex didn't reply. Instead, he reached into his jacket for another cigarette. He flicked open the pack with his index finger and offered one to Janet. She took one, and Alex plucked one in his mouth. He used his old flick light to roast the edge and then tossed it to his friend. I keep thinking back to that night, all that happened. It didn't start here, but the thought of seeing us all alive one last time, all packing into Tommy's cars. A few hours later, almost everyone was dead. Yeah, I get that. I've spent more time hiding inside generator rooms or wrenching on pipes than I have cleaning my gun the past 6 months. I still can't sleep at night. I feel like my mind is going to catch up to where my body is, but it's like I can't process it. You sleep much? Only a few hours here and there. It's sad. When we were on the Hell Chopper, the noisiest place you could ever sleep, I was fine and got my rest. I might have been sore, but I still slept. Since the tower, though, Janet trailed. So what are we to do? Alex asked. Fix things, Janet said, taking a long puff off the cigarette. You think that'll end the memories? You want the friend answer, or what I would have told you 6 months ago? I want your answer, Janet. More killing and more death isn't going to make Elias's ghost leave my head. It's not going to take away what we suffered through the day the tower fell. But to be honest, Alex, what we're doing isn't about us anymore. All we're doing, all we're setting up, it's not for us, it's for those who come after, so they don't have to do what we have. We're the fulcrum that'll eventually break. All we can hope for is that we pry the door open long enough for everyone else to get through. Yeah, I'm starting to get that, Alex replied. Jack, Otto, Dylan, that's what they tried to do for us. But it was just like the old man to remind us there was more work to be done. Those poor old bastards. Jack, Del, and Otto. It shouldn't have been that way for them. They deserved better. Alex shrugged. They did, but they died believing the world would be better for us. Maybe you're right. Maybe we're just a tool for everyone else. But if we get through, maybe our far-gone friends will be able to rest well. There was a silence for a time. As Alex pulled from his cigarette, his attention was drawn back over to the vehicle under the tarp. You gonna ask or just wait for me to bring it up? Janet asked, changing the subject. Alex smiled. What's under the goddamn tarp? Janet took a long drag off her cig and exhaled the smoke to the side as she walked over to the car. She pulled off the tarp, and Alex went wide-eyed. Jack's '69 Pontiac GTO sat there, unpainted but restored from the bullet-riddled and overturned condition Alex had left it in 6 months ago. I like it better this way. It doesn't look like a minigun had its way with it, Janet said. How the hell did you do it? Alex couldn't stop staring at the car, lack of paint and all. There were a lot of parts in old storage units, and as for the repairs, well, you can blame that on too many sleepless nights. I needed it to keep my hands busy. It's yours, Alex. Janet walked back over to Alex and reached into her pocket. She dropped a key into his hands and a moment later made back for the club. She didn't say another word. Alex watched her go. She carried on like she always had, but Alex could see the pain. He heard it in her voice, saw it in her walk. That was a punch in the gut. It made him wish Elias was still alive, partly for his own selfish reasons, and he wanted to see Janet happy. She deserved it after the life she had been through. Then Alex thought that maybe they all did. He tried letting those thoughts go as he opened the door to the GTO and sat inside. Alex slid the key into the ignition and pressed his foot down on the clutch. When he turned the key, the engine roared with new life. It was like turning it on for the first time. A car that shouldn't have even been a memory was brought back to life not once, but twice. That's all hope is. Even when the bad shit happens, you find a way to rebuild, to keep going. Alex turned the keys and shut off the car. He would drive the GTO again, but not tonight. Maybe not even by the end of this year. He grabbed his beer, ashed his cig on the ground, and made back for the club. With renewed purpose, he was ready for what was to come. I had that bike for around 20 years, pretty much since the bombs fell. To lose it in one long bad evening makes me feel sick, Gates said as he pushed his empty beer bottle aside. Layla nodded as a waitress came over and brought them more booze. I know what it's like to not want to let go of our most treasured items. Gates bobbed his head a couple times, a few buzz nods before he grabbed his next beer and took a long pull. I'll drink to that. Before I do, I have to ask, is that journal one of your treasured items? Layla smiled. In a way, I suppose it is. You must have seen Alex writing. It's his. Some days I know more of what's going on in his head from this than what he's willing to tell me. Gates chuckled. Yeah, but I thought I saw you writing in it too. I do, sometimes, but it doesn't mean as much to me as it does Alex, especially after the tower. It's like he's afraid of telling me how he feels, even though I'll read about it anyway. The sad part is that we share a lot of the same feelings about that day. The hardest burdens to live with are the ones we keep inside ourselves. Someone told me that once, I don't remember who, but I'd say they were wise, and damn well right. You could almost take that literally. Alex's first journal was solid enough to stop a bullet. What now? When we reached John Morrison's office at the top of the tower, the man had the drop on us. He fired a shot from his pistol that caught Alex in the chest. I thought he was dead. I really did. It turned out the bullet was stopped by his old journal. Destroyed most of his early pages. The first part of my life, as Alex likes to put it. I'm not sure he meant it so literally at the time, but there it is. Gates drained the rest of his beer as Layla finished the story. Quite the tale. One day you'll have to tell me how it all went down from start to finish. Layla smiled back at Gates. Count on it. That's when Alex showed up at the booth the two were sitting at and grabbed a seat near Layla. Alex, beer? Gates asked. Alex held up the half-finished beer he already had in his hand. Nah, I'm all right. You two ready? Yeah, just about. Once Vale is done, we're all set for the trip, Layla replied. What's he doing? Alex asked. Getting some last-minute orders from Janet, I'm sure. He said it was important he talk to her before we leave. Don't ask me about what, because I sure as hell don't know, Layla said. Well, whatever it is, I hope he's done soon. I'm ready to get up in the sky, Alex said. Gates sipped another new beer that had been brought over to him. That was some pretty stirring stuff back at the meeting, kid. You've got a way to motivate people. Haven't seen that in a long time. I've had to learn. Not really what I expected when I decided to start a war. It isn't as simple as pointing to the enemy and saying kill. People need more of a reason than that. They need a cause. It's one thing to pay someone to do a job, but when they believe they're capable of more, Alex said. It's interesting. After the war, there were small communities out west. They always fell apart or turned into authoritarian tribes. Sometimes little better than raiders or the assholes you meet in the groom. There was no respect except for the guy or gal who had the most guns, Gates explained. It's a different world out in the dead zones, Alex replied. Here we still had civilization, though the warping of it was a slow thing brought on by Morrison. The people here, the refugees, knew enough about the old world to fight for a different change. A lot of them knew revolution wasn't the same as anarchy, regardless of what people in power wanted them to think. And so the Crusaders were born, Gates added. That's true to a point. The old books painted them as conquerors, fighting for a belief and against another. We fought against radical change with radical change. That part made me mind the name less, but knowing what Beruger said almost makes me glad that name is dying out, even if the people around here never forget what we did, Alex explained. Like most of the Crusaders themselves, Layla added. Alex turned and looked at her. He saw the sorrow and felt it too. This was the part she was hiding, and that he was trying to hide but failed to do so. What? She asked. Nothing, Alex replied as he got up from the booth. I'll see you both on the roof. Janet let her legs hang over the edge of the roof of Alonso's club. She rocked them back and forth as she watched the sunset behind the distant wastes of Union City. The orange sky was comforting, but she wished she would be one of the few flying through it shortly. Even now, she was trying to come up with a way to go with Alex and Layla and the rest on their trip. She thought it was a betrayal that she had to stay and guard the city. That's bullshit and you know it. You're choosing to stay behind. It's called responsibility, not betrayal. Don't fucking lie to yourself or come up with excuses. You need to stay here. Janet reached for the holster attached to her belt loop and grabbed Elias's pistol. It was still unclean, still scarred from the fires at Yankee Stadium, still unused since Alex had killed John Morrison. God damn it, why am I doing this to myself? Occasionally she wanted to toss the damn gun over the edge and be done with it, but her heart would never allow her that simplicity. This was the only item that belonged with her dead lover that was worth having. What would you say to have all this shit make sense, Eli? You always had an answer, even if I thought you didn't believe it, Janet said out loud. The sky was fading to the black of night, and stars were beginning to glimmer from afar. No answer spoke to her, and none came to her mind. Janet set the pistol back in its holster and got off the ledge. When she turned on, Tyrese was waiting for her on the helipad. Shit, how long has he been here? How did I not hear him behind me? Doing all right? Tyrese asked. His arms were folded, and his sunglasses were dangling from the neckline of his tank top. Yeah, I'm good. We're gonna be fine. You know that, right? You're with Alex and Layla. How could you not be? I know how badly you want to go. I can stay if... No, and that's not a knock against you running shit here, Vale. Hell, without you, this place wouldn't be where it is now. But... You need to do this. You need to know the history of the Crusaders. You watched us from afar, but you want to be in the thick of it. To be a part of that history and to document it. This is your chance. I'm not going to take that away from you. Tyrese gave her a smile. So that's why he picked you. What? You're hard, Janet, but you don't hesitate to make the decisions you believe are right. The difficult ones. You're not afraid to explain them or stand by them. You're the leader this city needs. Janet wanted to recoil away from that, but it made her feel good inside to see that her work was being recognized. She knew Alex was too much like the old man to outright thank her for the work or give her the acknowledgement she so wanted to hear from her old friend. Thanks, Tyrese. That means a lot. Some days I'm not sure if my right hand knows what the left is doing. You'll be fine. You always are, Tyrese said as he moved closer and put a hand on Janet's shoulder. We're going to get all this sorted out, be back in time for you to join in on the fun. Vale turned around and made for the bird. Janet let a smile come across her face as she watched him go, all the while fighting that familiar feeling of uneasiness bubbling in her chest.